What's up, everyone? Thank you so much for being here. Today, we'll be talking again with the Unable Table, Drew, who I spoke to before. And we're going to talk more about Christianity, atheism, and the Smash scene and related topics. So, should be a good time. Always looking forward to these discussions. I know it's not for everyone, so if you want to, dip out, that's fine. If you want to stick around, even better. McWheel, yes, you're discussing those topics again. I'm really glad you're here. Thank you so much for being here, and for anyone. And this is an unusual time to stream as well, but I mean, it's more about just having an open discussion and a sort of an archive, so you can go back and check this out later if you'd like. And this is just sort of we'll go into it a little bit more when we start talking, but I'm hoping that more of these discussions can start happening, because I think I'm a big fan of conversations like this, and they're not always easy to have. So hopefully we can kind of set a model for that. Sidewinder, how's it going, man? Good to see you. It's been a minute. How's your have you been? How has you played good Melee lately? We'll get right into it now. I will introduce our guest, and oh, you know what I should do? I should actually update the title of this and include guest so that people can use the guest command. All right, without further ado, let's move on to our interview screen. Hey, Drew, how's it going?
Hey, oh, I'm a little off crop. Let me get into your thing.
I can also move the crop too if it would be helpful.
There, no, I did it. I'm a people pleaser.
Sweet. Sidewinder says, doing pretty well. You played very little Melee. I don't know if you looked at your Unwrapped for last year, but mine was embarrassing. It was very little hours. It was like 10 hours or something. It was so little.
10 hours of Melee?
For the whole year. Yeah.
Oh, so you're not playing a lot right now.
I'm not, but see, again, that doesn't count going to locals, which I went to a few locals, and I do a ton of videos on Melee. I just don't use Slippy specifically. So
you're invested in the scene, but
yeah, but not specifically strictly playing Melee. Yeah.
Yeah.
On Slippy, I mean. Yeah.
It's hard to find the right relationship to have with the game.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, all that to say, Sidewinder, I feel you. I feel you. So for those of you that have not been here before, Drew came on a couple weeks ago, and we talked about just contrasting ideas between ideas about Christianity and atheism. We went back and forth a bit on that, and then we also dove a bit into some of the cultural differences and things in Smash, and it's sort of interesting to talk about. And there aren't a lot of people who are on what you could consider different sides of like the political aisle or the religious aisle that are willing to have these conversations, and Drew is one of those people that I seem to identify as someone who's willing to chat with me. So we made it happen, and it was a really fruitful conversation. I really enjoyed it, and so we're gonna do it again.
Yeah, I mentioned you say people willing to chat with you. That's how it always feels, is there's no one willing. There's a fair amount of people who are just going like, please talk to me, talk to me, talk to me, and I just can't find. This is the same for me. It's hard to find people willing to talk on either side. I'm like a centrist. I'm like a centrist in everything. And so yeah, we might get to it a bit later. Because I've been having these talks, and primarily they've been publicly with people related to the Mana Monthly, or people who are more really right-leaning on political issues. And my sense is that they're the only ones really willing to talk, in part because they're the ones who don't have as much voice in this space right now. And so they're like, please, anyone, talk to me.
Well, yeah, and to some degree, they probably feel they have less to lose at this point, whereas someone more instantiated in the scene that's maybe, not as outspoken, or maybe like doesn't want to delve into that, they have a lot more to lose potentially by talking to someone who wants to kind of talk about these topics and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, because I have met a fair number of people who are left-leaning and willing to talk, but none really want to talk publicly. I guess for understandable reasons. But it just kind of sucks. But maybe we'll talk about the politics stuff later. I think so. We spoke. It was like 3 or 4 weeks ago. How have you been since then?
I've been good. it's been fun to just think about our discussion, and it's also been kind of fun because people have been reaching out to me already. I don't know if it was based on that or something else, but it's fun to know that not everyone feels comfortable doing this, but people are interested and they want to kind of be involved. So they reach
Yeah.
out to you privately, and I know that's happened to you as well. So it's
Yeah.
just been fun to that's been happening probably more so in the last couple of weeks than mostly any other time.
Then most,
So
yeah, that makes
yeah.
sense. Yeah, it's really hard to make your voice heard, and then when you do, people do hear it, even if it's not, even if, the platforms say it's 20 people watching, 100 people watching. I don't have much of a platform, but even then, people notice that you're talking about stuff and they like to hear it. I went to Genesis. Genesis was a lot of
Oh,
fun.
awesome.
Um, yeah, it was pretty exciting. I did a performance art protest piece while I was
Really?
there.
That's right. I think
Yeah.
you mentioned that on one of your other
A
on one of
mech
your
interview,
calls.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess I'll show it. So the idea was I walked around the entire time with this sign. On one side it said unban. I don't know if anyone could, it's easy to see in my little box, but it says unban and you can write anything or anyone that you want to be unbanned. So lots of stages in here, or the unbanned Zion or unbanned hack sticker. It's hard to see. Um, and on the other side, it says "Be yourself." Be yourself. It's really hard to see in this little box, but
Here, what I'll do right now is I'll change the
yeah,
scene to where you're more
yeah, yeah.
prominent, and then it'll be easier to see.
Okay, good, good, good. Yeah, show my little thing. Yeah, so on this side it says unbanned, and people can write anything or anyone they want to be unbanned. Um, and then on this side, be yourself, where you can say anything you feel, or if you don't like what someone feels, you can censor it. You can scratch it out and censor it if you think that it was unpleasant or offensive or whatever. In part because I can't be walking around with a sign that says any crazy anti-Semitic thing if anyone happens to decide. Um, and I was pretty excited for it. I had a talk with a friend. I didn't publicize it all about art generally, and he convinced me to do art for it. That um, I guess the goal was to figure out or to maybe understand a little better what the culture is like in the Smash scene. I wasn't exactly sure how the project was going to turn out. I wasn't sure if at the end of it, if I end up with basically everything's just been scratched out, it's like I guess you just can't be yourself at a tournament. Um, or if people would say stuff, or people wouldn't be willing to say controversial things on it. Um, and what I found ultimately, what ended up happening was one, people were actually in person very supportive. I had unanimously positive comments at
Wow.
the event. Not one person said something negative to me in person. Plenty of people didn't know anything about what I was doing, but plenty of people had also seen the stuff. And among both of those groups, both thought that the project was positive and nice and interesting. Um,
Great.
People who say I thought maybe were sometimes unhinged things on Twitter, they wrote very nice things on the sign. Um,
Do you have more to
uh,
show, or can we go back to our interview scene?
you can go back to the interview.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
that's enough to get the general idea.
Great.
There were a lot of challenges involved in doing it, just in terms of like also trying to like play the game, because
Oh,
like walking around with your unhinged sign and like trying to get people to sign it or whatever takes time, and then handing out the stickers or whatever. So it was a bit of a contrast, but I think altogether it turned out pretty well. And I did get negative comments when I played on stream. I played on the Genesis stream against Bimbo, and on some level, I'm walking around with this sign doing this art thing, and they say I have to play on stream. It's like I don't have any choice. I like, have to show the fucking thing. Sorry, I have to show the thing on the stream. And the commentator freaked out. The commentator was like cancel this guy, get him off the stage. I'm not comfortable commentating this. Now the VOD's
Really?
since been deleted, so I can't
Oh,
actually link it.
interesting.
Um, and then the chat was hugely negative. The chat was hugely negative. All sorts of like really insulting, unpleasant stuff.
Hmm.
Calling me all lot of stuff. It was a pretty unanimously negative on the internet, and I think my lesson from it is that the internet turns people into psychopaths. I think that's not the lesson I expected to take from it. But the lesson that I've taken from it is that actually, in person at Smash tournaments, people are really chill. They do make space for you to say how you feel or what you think. Maybe there's some, it's a semi-professional environment, is the other thing I learned. Semi-professional, meaning there are just certain topics that just shouldn't come up. But within regular semi-professional kind of like work bounds, um, actually everyone was extremely chill. There was a sense of being a little uneasy about writing stuff on the sign. I did have a few people. I had someone who, because I also made stickers. Um, well, you know what? Oh, I don't have my backpack anymore. Crap. Um, well, anyways, I had a fair few stickers. Some that said, unban Zion, unban hacks. Metagame was censored, went pretty hard. Um, and oh, bullying is wrong. That one was a popular sticker. People like the bullying is wrong sticker.
Hmm.
Um, uh, and yeah, so I guess I learned that yeah, internet makes people really
Yeah.
crazy.
I'd love to learn. I'd love to learn a bit more about. So first off, I'm really curious to learn more about your experience, just kind of walking around with this sign and getting the looks that you got, and then also
Yeah.
I'm interested in the kinds of comments that commentary made, and also like what people in
Yeah,
chat
I
made.
should have downloaded the VOD. I
Yeah.
didn't think it was going to be deleted, but
Who?
it's
Yeah.
not there anymore.
That's too bad. But the
Um,
first part I'm more interested.
yeah,
I'm more.
it was it was
Was
kind of
it?
more, and it was like it wasn't because I had a friend message me and was like, "Oh wow, this commentator like really hates you. He's talking about canceling you or whatever." It's like, "Oh, that's funny." Like he was probably like joking or whatever. And I watched it. And he's like really upset, and then he chills out like pretty suddenly. I don't know if because he like threatens to leave, kind of. I don't know if like production told him to chill or something, but they chill out and then they just commentate like normal.
Hmm.
So it's kind of weird. It's like
Huh.
30 seconds, kind of 20 seconds of him kind of freaking out, and then they just drop it, and then they just commentate as normal. And then the chat's kind of freaking out for a while,
I'm gonna move
calling me a
your
loser, calling it cringe. That was a really common one, that it's so cringe. Redditor behavior,
like so and
virgin
but
behavior.
but like was there concerns levied to you that you is it because you spoke with certain people? Is it because you espoused certain views? Like what was like the center of their claim if you that you could discern?
That it was an unbanned hacks sign,
Oh.
and that's it, really.
Oh.
That's it, really. Yeah. That
So
they
wait,
and
so when you played on stream,
but
were you visibly showing the unbanned
yeah,
hack sign? And that's
I went.
what people had a
I was
problem
on
with.
stream. I held up and showed the sign in front of the camera, and
Okay.
then I played my set.
Okay. So it's
Um,
more about that more than like you personally. It was more about like this the fact that you had a
well,
sign
the
that said
comments got quite personal.
well, it became
Yeah.
personal, but it wasn't because of you as a person. It was because of the sign that you held.
Well, yeah. Well, they did say like, oh, it's that guy, the monomonthly
So
guy.
some people did
You
recognize you
might
for
want to,
that.
yeah.
Even though you're not the man and monthly guy, you're the person that spoke with some people associated with it, which is so funny. It's like
Yeah.
one thing I noticed too, this is actually really
You got a
funny.
little of that too. I think you sent
I
me.
did. I did. I
Yeah.
posted in the I wasn't at Genesis, unfortunately. I'd love to go someday, but I posted in the chat and someone said, "Aren't you the man and monthly guy?" And I thought I didn't even know how to respond. I was like, I don't know what that means, but also no. Like I never joined. I've never joined. I like the tournament series. I mean I've literally talked with people in the server and I've chatted with
Yeah.
people there. I don't mind. I don't gatekeep who I talk to based on what tournament series that they're in. But it was just so strange. I thought how did you connect these dots? I don't. It
The
was really weird.
association is interesting.
Yeah.
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 Um,
Okay.
Yeah, so everyone in person was actually super chill. I did have one person who was a friend of Zion. I was like, "Oh, you're friends with Zion? Well, take some unbanned Zion stickers." And he was like, "If if I'm seen holding these stickers, you're going to have to make an unban me sticker." And he said this tag. I'm not going to out him, uh, but it's pretty funny. And a few people had comments like that. Um, so there is, uh, and that's something um, I really was very ready and in some ways hoping that people would be willing to say something negative on the sign, any negative feelings or dark or anything at all, and 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 then to let other people decide that it was too much or not enough, or for, I mean, if it was enough, I would have also scratched it out just because I don't want to get
Yeah.
but but there was a very big trepidation to express anything negative on the express yourself sign. So it was mostly very, very positive things.
Okay, that's great.
Um, which is which is uh which is good, but also I think then we go home and then with our anonymity, then we express all of our negative things.
Maybe that's what happened. So when you had this sign, was it like when it was completely empty? Did you just like approach people, or did they approach you? How did that happen?
Usually if I saw someone looking at it, I'd be like, "Hey, what do you think of the sign?" I would explain how they could write on it, and it always takes a good 45 seconds, a minute to explain it. And then they're
Hmm.
like, oh, yeah, sure, I'll write something. Like, here's a pen. I've got 20 pens. And yeah, and so I definitely underestimated in terms of in terms of in getting people to engage with the sign. I also left the sign out next to me while I was playing it. Sometimes people came up and wrote on it. Um, Engaging people in it, and then also the handing out the stickers too. There was a real distribution problem. It was just very hard like it was time consuming to distribute. So most of the time, I would say half the time that I actually just talked to someone about it, they'd be like, "Yeah, I'll take some of these stickers or whatever." But and that was in part why I was hoping. That was one reason I was doing that little mono-monthly circuit, was just to hopefully find some people who agree and would help me do some kind of protest. But I did it all alone. So the scope was definitely much lowered because of that.
Yeah, makes sense. What are your like overall takeaways? I mean, like, is this something that you recommend for other people to do at locals and like try to get
Mm.
people to voice things, or is it something that
Yeah.
maybe you do it differently?
Yeah. Um, hmm. Would I do it differently? Um, I haven't done a big performance art thing before, so I'm pretty happy with it generally. Um, I think on some level, I really, performance art is weird because you're like doing it actively for days on some level, but you're also trying to be like a normal person at a tournament playing a video game, so you're kind of doing both. And then um, in some ways with the performance art, you don't totally know what it means until you've done it. Um, and so there was something very investigative about doing it, and then getting to look back on it in hindsight. Ultimately, I'm actually pretty happy about it. I think it was a really good experience. And The comments on the internet were, I think, really interesting because they're talking about how it's like unhinged behavior, like who would do this, like what, like internet behavior, and it's like, or pussy behavior was a common one that people would say, and it's like, really, it's like a lot harder to do that than to just like talk negative things about people on the internet. Like it's actually
Sure.
way, way harder
I
to
believe
do
it.
that.
I believe it.
And there were points where I definitely got nervous. So going up onto the on the stage, I and putting the thing up there, it was funny hearing the commentary afterwards because I knew that it could end up being bad for me. I think Technicals got kicked out of a venue for wearing an unbanned someone shirt.
Right.
So I knew that there was a possibility that security would try to make me leave, and I was going to have to resist, I
Mm.
guess. It would not have been pleasant.
How did you
Um,
perform in the tournament itself, by the way?
I did pretty well for my sake, anyways. Like, I've been pretty out of practice. I made first round pools. I beat Okami BW, if you know him. Pretty good player. He's old school, old school. But and I used my fox, which was cool. It's always cool when the Jigglypuff player pulls out their fox and beats people in. So I had two really good sets in losers that I won. They were very close last hit, game five
Hmm.
sets, Jigglypuff Chic. One of them had a big crowd, which is pretty exciting. There was a timeout in one of them that I lost. I lost the timeout. Yeah, the tournament was pretty exciting. And then also
Good.
I got to play a lot of Brawl, which was fun.
Oh, sick. Yeah, I saw there were some brawl
Yeah.
setups there, and they were not
Yeah.
PM. They were definitely brawl.
Yeah, they were Brawl. Yeah, yeah. So I got to play some Brawl, which was fun. That's where I started. And so
Yeah,
there were people I knew from back in the day that I got to play, which
that's
was really
cool.
fun.
Nice.
Yeah, I hadn't played the game in 12 years. Um, um, yeah. So in general, yeah, the tournament was just a really great experience. I think uh, yeah, my takeaway actually, I went in feeling like there's something really dark inside the community. And what I came away learning is it's not the IRL events really.
Right.
It's this social media thing that turns people into psychopaths.
Hmm.
Um, because the just stark contrast between I had exactly one engagement on the internet that touched the internet, and it wasn't even commenters, but also like a commentator talking live. The fact that it was in front of an audience made him act totally differently to how he would have acted otherwise.
Right.
Because I'm pretty sure if I had gone up to him with that sign, because my experience was unanimously positive. So I'm pretty sure if I gone up to him with that sign and had like shown, hey, you want to, say how you feel on the sign or whatever, I probably would have engaged with it. But
Yeah.
because it was on this stream situation where he felt in some way maybe responsible for whatever I might have been saying on there,
Hmm.
which made him freak out, and then all the commenters, yeah. So the internet I found is what's actually really messing things up, I
You know what's
think.
funny too? This even before like things got oddly political or whatever, I noticed that even because when I was starting to get more into Melee, it was like 2011, 2012, and I started going to locals. And the perception very much online was, wow, Melee people are insufferable. They're like really uppity, elitist people. They are
Yeah.
completely unfriendly to new people. And it was so funny. I kept reading that. I was like, are we on different
It's scary.
planets? That's not
Yeah.
even true. I was brand new in terms of being competitive, and
Yeah,
I was
which was
welcomed with open arms, and people were
yeah.
excited. They were eager to help me be better, and
Yeah.
that it was completely the opposite of how it was characterized. And so you're right. Something about anonymity, I think, something about being in your own little box and not being in face to face does affect it. But I also don't want to be in the camp firmly of like social media is a cancer that's bad and it's only bad, because I've made so many great connections on that are
Yeah, it's
online
not only
first
that.
connections
Yeah.
that have ended
Yeah.
up becoming some of the most fruitful friendships of my
Yeah.
life, very literally. And so I have
I think a lot of it is Twitter. I think
no, I would
a
say
lot of
Twitter.
hackers on
Twitter
Twitter make it
specifically is where I've made some of my best
Twitter
connections.
Twitter is a huge platform, so it will grow. You can get a lot of growth through Twitter, which can be a good thing. But there's a lot of features of Twitter that lend themselves particularly to psychopathic behavior. Though, a Twitch chat room does in its own way too, and I guess most of the platforms are messed up in their own way,
I
but
think
Twitter
any
has some
platform,
pretty
I think
early
any
straight things
platform that
about it.
allows for amplification of something is going to amplify the good and amplify the bad. So that's just the way that I see it. Like anything that kind of makes the human condition made manifest at a greater scale, you're going to have extremes of both. And I think Twitter was one of the first like interests-based social networks that really worked as an interest-based networking platform. And now you have so many versions. You have Discord. You have Reddit's way more popular. You have all these. You have all these platforms.
I
Twitch.
think Discord is less toxic than Twitter. There is huge ways in which Discord can be, but I think
Sure.
like in
I didn't
terms of
mean
at least
I
like the
didn't mean
cyberbullying,
I
the
didn't mean in a degree.
cyberbullying that you can do on Twitter
Yeah,
is
yeah. I didn't
crazy.
mean in terms of like that. I meant in terms of like interest-based social networks, and
Yeah.
Twitter was simply one of the first ones that worked. And now we have all these other options. So I think people see Twitter as
Yeah.
toxic, and there's reasons for it, certainly. But it was the first one, in my opinion, where you can make really meaningful connections over shared interests. And of course, since then, I think Discord is a better way to do that, almost because you have these microcosms of like interests, and that it's not as public as Twitter is, and there's some, and
Yeah.
maybe it lends itself to being less toxic. But I almost would say the more private nature of Discord has its own problems in terms of like grooming and like really sketchy stuff too.
Yeah.
So
That's fair.
obviously there's pros and cons either way. So all that to say, I'm not on the hate train for social media, but I will say
Mm.
what you're talking about when it's
I
you had
might
an
be on the hate
experience in
train for
person
social media.
and it
I
was
think I'm
different from
on the hate
online.
train. I'm on the hate train for social media. I think something about it is like really, I don't know. I think
Hmm.
it's part of it is necessary, and like it's a matter of it's the platform that where you reach people through. But I think at least we need some really strong awareness that the platform is just so different from it's really easy to think that it's real life. And it's like an echo of real life in a way.
Mm-hmm.
You're not really getting to see people as regular people, and a lot of it really incentivizes. Um, you only get 240 characters, and the algorithm is quite perceptive to engagement, and so it really heavily incentivizes being very punchy in 240 characters. It really incentivizes making fun of people.
Hmm.
You're highly incentivized to make it fun of people rather than
Hmm.
be like thoughtful or careful compared to some other platforms. I compare to when so I was around when Super Smash Brothers was organized on Smash boards.
Yes.
Um, and so I have a Smashboards account. I have some 1,800 posts on Smashboards. Um, and certainly it had some issues. But and the community had issues too, some that were addressed by the mob nature of Twitter. But I think a lot of the mob nature has really gone too far. Part of the thing we were talking about was there's a guy. I think we were going to talk about this. Maybe the alcohol thing.
Yeah.
E-tossed.
Yes.
Um, I think this is kind of a good example of how Twitter makes us handle problems maybe not in their best way.
Okay.
I mean, maybe it makes it easier to talk about if something toxic happens at a tournament. Um, but on the other end, if our only response that we really have to something toxic is like mass hate and harassment and eventual ban, then it's not a subtle enough platform to allow for meaningfully handling like moral situations, like situations that are complex or confusing about yeah, holding people together. I don't think that legislating via Twitter ratios is like really a great way to handle um, mistakes that someone makes in a community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Possibly.
what do you think about the ETOS thing? Are you willing to talk about it?
Yeah, I'm totally willing to
Yeah,
talk
yeah.
about it. So I want to just summarize the events as I
Yeah.
understand them, and then we can kind of go into it. So from what I understand, um, who's the other user that initially posted about it? I can't remember his
Spark.
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 That's right.
Who's
Who's Spark?
local to NorCal.
Yes.
I know him somewhat well. I mean, we've talked a good 40 times in my
Mm-hmm.
life. But I wouldn't say we've ever been close to him, we've been friends, but I like Spark. He's a really funny, he's a really nice, really good guy, Spark.
Cool. So
And he's
what
very
what
good at the game.
yeah, I actually am familiar with Spark as well. I just could not remember
Yeah.
his tag. So Spark made a comment about how he actually I actually remember when he tweeted like, "Hey, in case it's not obvious, I don't want like an unprompted kiss or whatever." I actually saw that tweet when he posted it, and I didn't know
Yeah.
what that was talking about. And then of course later he kind of said, "Well, yeah, Etost, he was like completely inebriated, and then he kissed me on the cheek without any warning, and I didn't appreciate that."
I'll add a little bit. So, so the way he described it was basically like Etost like was kind of forced him into a an embrace like, oh,
Yes.
I love you, Spark. And Atos, I guess I haven't met the guy, so, but I get the sense that he's a lot bigger and stronger than Spark, and Spark is like, okay, I want personal space, and he pulls him in, and he's like trying away, and then he plants one on his cheek, and he's like trying to stop him, like he's like physically trying to stop him.
Yes.
So it wasn't like a little quick like
No.
in
Yeah.
and out before you could react.
Yeah.
But there was like an amount of this guy is like a lot bigger and kind of forced his way
Sure.
into that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's
for
meaningful.
Spark, it was like really upsetting. Yeah, for Spark, it was
It
really
was
upsetting.
upsetting,
Like
right?
more than just like, I think, yeah, I think the forceful nature of it,
Yes.
and the like, I made him feel kind of powerless.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I guess, and again, I'm not. Whenever we talk about things that have been made public that maybe ought not to have been, and by that I mean, ideally, you deal with your issues privately, and then you move on, and you don't make a spectacle out of it. But obviously, sometimes people don't play along, they don't cooperate, and you have to take things public. But whenever that happens, you don't know all the details. You don't know if everyone's being truthful. You don't have a camera. You didn't watch the whole thing happen, right?
Mhm.
So, just that disclaimer out of the way. It seems like maybe, for one thing, the elephant in the room is Etos claims he doesn't even remember doing that. And why? Well, because he was blackout drunk or whatever. He had a lot to drink. So, I guess my one thing is a lot of these issues that come up seem to come from alcohol based activity. And so one time about 4 years ago, when the Me Too stuff was coming out, I said, hey, I feel like maybe, and I shared this with the tweet with you already. I said, maybe just a lot of alcohol at tournaments as like a habitual activity is not a good idea, especially when there's underage people around. And I got some negative feedback from that from posts that are no longer there. So maybe they were deleted or
Yeah, that
something.
happens a lot.
Yeah. But I remember at the time they thought, how can you blame the alcohol for this or something? And I thought that you guys are coming across with people that are very defensive about a vice they don't want to get rid of. That is the vibe you are giving me right now. I understand like alcohol in and of itself isn't bad. Like I take communion every week. Like if that counts. I mean, I obviously don't have a problem with alcohol at all. It's just it's just the you instantiate these habits of heavy drinking, and you're surprised with all this catastrophe. And it's like oh, we need to do better, we need to like ask for consent. It's like all that's fine, but that's not the root cause of all this stuff. It's very obvious to me what the root cause is.
Yeah, I think um well, there was one thing I do want to talk about the alcohol. There was something you said right before talking about the alcohol I wanted to mention about Spark
Okay.
deciding to talk about it publicly or privately. And I don't know for sure, but I'm gonna guess people around him were like, "Hey, you should probably go public." And he had this his reasoning he gave, which I think makes sense. At least I get it. I wouldn't have done it myself, but because I've been in the same situation. One thing I want to mention is I've had really something exactly like this happen. I spent a month and a half in Europe, and on the first night that I was in Spain, on a study abroad program, one of the guys in my study abroad program pinned me to a wall while he was drunk, pinned me to a wall and tried to, you know, do sexual stuff to me, and I like really tried to push him off, and then eventually pushed him off, and then he stumbled around or whatever, and he done, and I wasn't the only person he kind of. There's also someone like he'd hit in that night or whatever. Um, and then he said afterwards he was blackout drunk. He really didn't remember that. He actually didn't know, and that seemed maybe kind of true. But part of the thing that's really confusing about blackout drunk is you don't know if they're blackout drunk or if they like can't handle what they've done, and so they're saying that they're blackout drunk.
Right.
Um, and also it's someone that other than that I liked them, and so it was, and then because I didn't know really if they were blackout drunk or not, I couldn't really trust them, and it really broke my trust for them in a way that it never healed with respect to them totally.
Was this someone that
Uh,
you knew before the trip?
Not really,
Okay.
not really. And I got to know them Oops, something funny happened on your end.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
uh Something I got to know them more as the trip went on, and it was very conflicting for me because it was like on one hand I wanted to get to know them more, on the other hand, very early on into getting to know them, they like horribly violated me, and they were a little toxic in other ways too. um but yeah, so there was plenty of reason to be continually cautious around them. um yeah, so it was very confusing. um it was very confusing for me. um Anyways, all this is to say that I really, there's an element just where I see, um obviously what happened to Spark is different than what happened with the guy that I knew. I think the guy that I knew, there was a more overtly sexual element because he was gay. Um, and I was like kind of bi-curious at the time. That was something that was very confusing for me. Was it was like, oh, maybe this, maybe I had just gotten out of my first relationship, and so the thought of like, oh, maybe, you know, experimenting with. It turns out I'm not bisexual, but I did plenty of experimentation to discover that for myself, and and that would have been, they would have been the person that it would have made a lot of sense to do so, other than the fact that the foundation of it was pretty screwed up. All this is to say, I do relate to Spark. There's so many things when something like that happens. It's totally confusing for your head, and like completely, it's really hard to understand. I mean, I'm like trying to talk about how my experience was, and I'm like fumbling over even how I've pieced together all this in the years later. So I can only imagine for him, since it just happened. In any case, and for me, I handled it privately, and but Spark chose not to, and one major reason he cited was that uh, this could be a pattern of behavior. You don't know. And so when you put this sort of thing out there, it lets other people potentially share their experiences. And then after that, someone shared their experience, but it's not the same kind of experience.
Alcohol
It's
is so
an
easily used as a
ex-girlfriend
crutch that even though I
who's,
don't think it's
um,
outright wrong,
well,
I
it
always
seems
treat
like a
introducing
complicated relationship.
alcohol in a
Claims that
situation
Yeah.
with
he's spreading
skepticism,
rumors about
guilty
her that
until proven
One
innocent
cheated
second
on
on
forever.
that.
him.
I want
Yeah.
to thank you, Donnie, for the 64-month streak and resub. He says alcohol is so easily used as a crutch that even though I don't think it's outright wrong, I always treat introducing alcohol in a situation with skepticism, guilty until proven innocent.
Mm,
Yeah, that's kind of how I am as well. Thank you so much for the resub, Donnie, and I
yeah.
couldn't agree more. Yeah.
So on that trip, I did, I think most of the drinking I've done, I definitely did my fair share of like really extreme drinking. I've never been blackout drunk, but I did a lot of drinking, and then people helped me wander my way home in the night. And then since then I haven't really done much drinking. Yeah, because it's pretty uh it's pretty dangerous.
Yeah,
Just
I want to address what you said though, but where you cited Spark saying, "Well, hey, it could be a repeated pattern of behavior. This might be helpful." Um, so I think if I recall correctly, Itas mentioned like he either like he asked him like, "Hey, I'm sorry that happened to you." Like he clearly did not remember that it happened. Um,
or he's
and
acting
so
like he
or
clearly
was
didn't remember
acting
that.
like he didn't.
Yeah.
So my first thought is like, hey, it doesn't matter if you are under the impression that he had no idea what happened. You address it with him personally first. You explain what happened. You kind of say, hey, this is a concern. If his concern was really it might be a repeated pattern of behavior, he might get some clues on that. Let's try to piece together. Hey, have you ever done this before? To your knowledge, has anyone ever come forward to you? Are there
Yeah.
cases? And then really get clear on that. And if he's obstinate, if he blocks you, if he ignores you, then I think it's appropriate to go public with it. But I think you start first with a private conversation before you
And I think
do
the
that.
fear is that sometimes people who chronically do this sort of thing, they're very good at talking themselves out of it when you go to them privately. And so, if someone does endlessly talk themselves out of things privately and nothing ever spreads around, then eventually, Eventually, one person goes public way long in the future, and then like 12 people share their stories of how this
Sure.
happened to them.
Again, I look at this from a biblical standpoint.
Someone eventually has
Yeah.
to go public with something.
I look at this from a biblical standpoint, though, because like the idea is you go to someone directly if you can, and if they're being uncooperative, you take a couple people with you, and then trusted people, and then you address them. And if they're still obstinate, then you can be public, and that's sort of the biblical approach that I'm very much a fan of.
Yeah, I don't know. There's definitely a line where you go, where you don't go to them though. There's definitely a line.
Sure, but it seemed like they were on speaking terms at least.
Yeah, they were friends.
Yeah,
they were friends.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I would have talked to him about it. Yeah, I did. When that happened to me, I had two like really long conversations with that person. That's the route that I took. But I mean, there's some other elements where the guy that did it to me had some red flags. I don't know. Maybe it would have been better, but I don't know that the whole place would have been better if I tried to get him kicked out or something, or kicked out of school. I don't know that things would have really been better because it was related to school. In principle, I probably had some power to do that. Um, I don't know.
But that all being said,
I would have. It's hard to compel. You know what? My unease is that it's hard to compel a victim to about how they should handle their abuse. I think is really the part that makes me uncomfortable there. Like, I've been in that situation and that's how I acted, but I would never ever judge a victim for how they handle their abuse.
Sure. Yeah, and that's really I mean, I guess that's a debate for another time. But I think
Well,
the
what
thing
do you
that's
think about that? Yeah. Yeah, let's have that debate now.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah.
I guess if someone recognizes that they're a victim, I don't think the impetus should be for them to handle anything on their own, whether that means they go public with it or whatever. I think they go to someone trusted and kind of say, this is the situation, sort of what do you make of it? And again, that's pretty much in line with the biblical line work.
That he probably did, and the people trusted told him to out.
I think that's bad advice, but but fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah. One thing about friends will often just be incredibly defensive of you. And sometimes yeah, friends will, I don't know, friends will give some crazy advice for you to defend yourself in all sorts of ways that may not be the most conducive.
Yeah, sure. And that's one problem with picking friends is you got to pick friends that'll tell you the right thing, not the thing that they think that you want to hear, which is very often the yes man approach.
Yeah, I wonder. Now, I said all that. That's all speculation that his friends suggest they did, but
yeah.
So all that could have been done on his own or not. But I suspect, anyways, that it wasn't just entirely held in until it was let out. But it could be.
Yeah, and I will say I feel a little bit dirty, like with the level of speculation that we're doing. However, because it was made public. And it's sort of an interesting case study to think about how can we address these things in the future. And if you find yourself as a victim, or you think you may be a victim, or if you think you might be guilty of something, hey, here's a situation. What if someone's watching this and listening, and they think, wow, you know what? I'm a little nervous now because I've gotten blackout drunk a few times. I don't really know if I've done anything, but gee, you know what? My relationship with a few people changed after this, or I was in the same room with this person. I wonder if I ought to reach out to them and say, hey, I'd love to know about anything that I may have done and apologize. And they go, oh, no, everything was fine. You go, great. Maybe it's worth reaching out to people and saying, hey, I'm trying to become a more responsible person and conduct myself in a more aware way. And I'd love to just make sure that we're on good terms. And hopefully you're have a good enough relationship with the people that you think you may have affected to have a conversation and maybe deal with things in private, because that's the best solution if you're well-meaning and you have good intent, I think.
Read this post in the chat from Donald Kimball. Seems to have some relation.
He's my brother,
Uh,
yes.
brother. That being a victim means you're immune to mistakes. I do agree with that. Um, in fact, in a lot of ways, being a victim, unfortunately, is probably going to make you especially likely to make mistakes. I think it's actually super common. However, I think as like a norm for creating a community, you don't want to make a norm where you are highly like picking at the how people respond to their abuse. I think you want to be very, very accepting and non-judgmental of how the person who experiences abuse ultimately comes to terms with it or decides to handle it. I think you want to be like highly understanding. You can I think it's still okay to maybe disagree with a person. So like I think it's okay to disagree with a person that even if they were abused, like someone can think they were abused and I can hear the story and think it doesn't sound like abuse to me, but I see that you're hurt or whatever. Um uh but I think you in a way you almost should get free reign to say you think you've been abused. And that we should listen when there's abuse, and we shouldn't, unless you're literally caught like lying about major elements.
Right.
Then I think you should get pre. So that's why I just feel like I really want to be very defensive of Spark. Like I think that handling a situation is like, basically impossible, and you do the best you can, and so. A lot of this talk is like hypothetical. What would I do? How would I handle this sort of thing? Do I think that this produced the best outcomes? But like, I don't think there's a huge moral impetus on the abuser to act optimally to how things go down.
Hmm.
I like victim blaming. I really don't want to victim blame. It's hard to write that line between like looking at a situation and looking at the sides and trying to decide how should we handle abuse claims and how should we act if it happens to us. And also, actually, this gets me to a question about Christianity.
Okay.
I was in the shower today. One thing I think is really tricky with the Christian worldview that I find kind of confusing is there is this strong uh, idea that you're not supposed to judge people as a Christian, that that's for God to do. Like, you don't know that they're going to go to hell.
Okay.
Yeah, like when people, like when Christians say, like, you're going to hell for that. And it's like, well, you don't know that. That's for
Correct.
God to decide.
Right.
Yeah. Um, and yeah. And so but in the real world we do it seems we still have to somehow make judgments.
Right.
How do we pair the non-judgmentalness that we're
Right.
supposed to have, like
Well,
that Jesus had?
yeah. So at one point of clarification, I think that's actually something that a lot of Christians get wrong is they think like, oh yeah, we're as Christians we're not supposed to judge people. That's not really what the Bible says. It says judge lest ye be judged. So it's sort of like if you're going to go around judging people, expect to be judged back. It doesn't say outright you can't judge people. It says that God's the perfect judge, and when it comes to the ultimate judgment, only God has knowledge on that and has the authority on that. But in like it doesn't say that you can't judge completely. So I absolutely do think that judging is necessary, but again, be understanding that judgments levied towards you should be expected if you intend to judge other people. It's more like that.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes, I mean, I think that's probably pretty true.
Mm-hmm.
um hmm.
Let me see if I can find the verse that I quoted. So I think Matthew 7, do not judge or you too will be judged. Well, you got one right there. For the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. And then of course there's the speck in your brother's eye with the log in your own eye analogy that I
Wait,
really
it was
appreciate.
Matthew what?
That was Matthew 7. So it doesn't straight up say, "Hey, don't judge people." That's not true. It's a misnomer about what Christianity believes.
Oh, the golden rule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a lot of Christians even say that Christians will
So
espouse
whatever
that
you
Christians
wish
shouldn't
that
judge.
others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law of the prophets. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
classic.
Yeah.
um, um, yeah. So I think handling these things is pretty difficult. I don't know what you do about smooth talkers when it comes to abuse stuff. Because there are people who like are good at talking themselves out of it one on one, and then and then yeah,
Smooth
and then
talkers.
that
I definitely have some
yeah.
thoughts about that. I want to address what Donnie just said too. Take the log out of your own eye before you take the speck out of your brother's eye. You are called to take the speck out of humility, but you got to take the log out of your own eye first. So it's not like ignore the speck in your brother's eye, focus on the log in your eye. It's actually address the log in your own eye before you address the speck in your brother's eye. So it's sort of it's implicit that you're there to help correct. And also, there's a lot of iron sharpens iron analogies in the Bible where it talks about correcting and in love, speaking truth in love, which I think also applies to this. Personally, I would say I would want people to judge me on my wrongdoings, especially if I'm claiming to be Christian. So yeah, my wife Effie claims that like any faithful Christian would want judgment from others and would want corrective instruction to not go astray. Right? That's just like a typical that should be a typical Christian perspective as well. Okay, so I want to go back to what you said. You said about smooth talkers. Can you give an example? Can you give an example just to help for illustration?
Yes, I have a fantastic example. Um, uh, um, there's have you ever heard of Jeffrey Epstein?
Have I heard of him? Of course.
Yeah. Okay. This guy was a smooth talker.
Hmm.
Okay. I read a short little description of some of the things in his life. Okay, so we all know how it all ended up. Um, but there was a story I had read about earlier in his life when he graduated from school when with a degree, I think it was like physics or something, just a bachelor's degree, and then he applied to teach at some universities, and he lied about having an advanced degree so he come in. And after they hired him, come in, and then they figure out, wait a second, he does not have the master's or the PhD or whatever it was that said he did, and so they call him in to talk to him and then fire him, and then he ends up getting like a promotion after they talk to him.
What do you say?
And there's like, I don't know. But there's this happened, and when I read the description of his life, it's like this occurrence happened a fair few times in his life where him being kind of deceitful and like whatever, someone kind of rings an alarm bell, they talk to him, and then he convinces them it's fine, this is an exceptional case or whatever, I should be able to do it or whatever. And even when there were abuse allegations. And it's like before long, it's not even clear how he ended up becoming so rich because he like managed hedge funds or something for wealthy people, and he just kept managing wealthier and wealthier people's hedge funds, and then all of a sudden he's like a billionaire. So it's like not completely clear he has money, but he was very, very good at talking to people. He had all these friends across academia, that were all friends with him. He knew how to collect rich and powerful people in the end, and then there were abuse allegations all along, and they got kind of talked or swept under the rug until ultimately some journalists really dug deep enough to paint a clear enough story and then they investigated and got him. But
Drew, do you want to move your camera a little bit so you're a little more
yeah,
centered?
yeah. You know, there.
Great.
Yeah, word for word asking for a friend. Yeah. Well, part of what I this is kind of horrible, but when I remember reading the description of his life, and it's like up until all the horrible stuff, it's like, man, this guy sounds so smart and awesome. Like this guy, that's what he did. And then he uses it for some really horrible things. But
Unfortunately, when people start realizing they have a gift, they tend to use it for ill, unless they are very disciplined.
Yeah, and so So I think that's sort of the fear of, well, I'll just go talk to them. Like maybe they'll end up just talking you out of it,
Getting
you
manipulated.
know?
Basically, they manipulate you out of the problem that you want to present.
Yeah, and then there's also a thought that someone who abused you, well, they're more likely to be manipulative in the first place. They abused you. They're not like regular. They might be evil.
Do you want to just jump in the deep end of controversy? I might even say like, oh wow, someone who's a smooth talker who has an imbalance of power, who's able to get out of seemingly any situation and still arrive on top. That kind of sounds like Leffen. I don't know.
Well, yeah. So, that's narcissism. So Jeffrey Epstein was a narcissist. Leffen's a narcissist. And everyone knows. I have I don't think narcissist means evil.
Right.
I have a pretty nuanced view of narcissism. A lot of people are doubtful that there are narcissists. But it's like 2%, like 2% of people. Like, so you can like think in your life about who are like, you know, two standard deviations, the most narcissistic people I know, they probably have a personality disorder. People who are never wrong, they're extremely defensive, they're Machiavellian and willing to conduct crazy plots to do various things. Um,
Yep.
Now, I narcissism isn't all bad. There's something about going out into the world and saying everyone else is wrong. I've got my own path, and I've got the right one. And I think that that's often the source of a lot of good things.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I think it's very easy to say that someone's a narcissist and then basically um, imply that they're like evil or something. I think, uh, uh, like any diagnosing thing, it can be used to kind of dehumanize people. And that's kind of the argument made about Leffen is that when we call them, we're kind of dehumanizing him, setting him up for harassment. But he's the one who's really saying that that's happening to him, and it's very convenient. Um, uh, but yeah, there's a lot of really powerful internet narcissists. In fact, one of the things we were also going to talk about was I'm going to talk with Dalton soon from America First.
Okay.
He's like an America First guy,
Right.
and but he's also helping run the Mana Monthly and bringing a big prize pot into it and trying to find
Mm-hmm.
sponsorships for it.
I saw over a
And
grand in prizes. That's amazing that they got that
yeah,
together.
um, and America First is kind of scary because I don't know how much you know about them, but they're run by a guy named Nick Fuentes, who is
Yes.
definitely an internet narcissist. He has a little cult. He has a little internet cult, and they also have some pretty extreme beliefs.
Right.
And so there's some elements of it I'm a little uneasy about talking to, but at the same time, you know, uh, I I think even still, people deserve to be humanized.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. No, I totally agree. In
yeah,
preparation for this discussion, I did do some more research on America First because I didn't know much about it. I did a little bit more research on Nick. It's actually I found not easy to find
yeah,
unbiased information just about the
it's
movement.
really hard.
It's usually
Really hard
like,
in
oh,
both ways.
it's very like, yeah, it was weird. There's not a lot of neutral information about the movement from what I could
Yeah,
tell.
yeah. Well, and you'll find quote after quote of like Nick Fuentes saying some like horrible, crazy thing, but then it's like he's joking, and like he is joking a lot of the time. So they use irony a lot. They use like meta irony so that it's
Right.
very confusing
Almost
exactly
like Sam
what
Hyde
happened.
esque.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and
So it's
by the way, I don't care who
pretty
knows it. I'm a
interesting.
huge fan of Sam Hyde. I think he's hilarious, and he constantly crosses the line, and then he goes, "Oh, I'm joking. Oh, I'm not," or whatever, because he
Yeah,
just wants to do funny stuff, and he doesn't really care if it's like considered shocking or not, and he'll just say whatever he needs to keep doing what he's doing. So,
yeah. Um,
hey, sub, thanks. I appreciate that. Welcome in.
yeah, and so yeah, I mean, I think internet narcissists are real. They're definitely real. Yeah, Leffen pretty clearly is a narcissist. It's kind of messed up that you saying that's I think the thing with the hack stuff is pretty frustrating that So my defense of Hacks is that basically he's saying that Leffen was abusive, and I think you should always be allowed to just say like I think that there's an abuse claim here. I think you should always be allowed to say that.
Hmm.
And I think that's part of what was very confusing for Hacks with all the stuff is that we went through a Me Too movement where basically we normalized that you
Hmm.
could just out if you felt like there was abuse, you could just out. And also he was a bit unhinged in a lot of the ways that he suggested there was abuse, but there's some elements where it wasn't very unhinged, and basically people just like totally ignore the parts that aren't. So um
Yeah.
or people say, oh, it was 10 or 11 years ago, and it's like, I mean,
Here's.
Metagame came out in 2021,
Hmm.
and and it talked about him doing that, and then he used his giant internet platform to bully Samox
Hmm.
into censoring it. And then Samox says, well, the one of the victims of it asked me actually to censor it because he didn't like the attention he's getting. It's like, oh, so Leffen's massive internet harassment audience was bullying his abuse victim into convincing the documentary owner to censor the documentary, and so we get this like revisionist history, and like
Well,
you
yeah,
should
and
be allowed to talk about that. And so the people that want
yeah,
to ban Hacks, what's very frustrating is that none of them will make a statement on that fact. None of them will
right,
make a statement on whether or not like Metagame was censored or not.
right,
And they basically are just like, well, Hacks, you're a complete schizophrenic. All this is completely crazy. You're harming yourself and you're harming others. You're too dangerous. And it's like, well, maybe you should make a statement on some of the facts or how you see the facts,
yeah.
whether or not his audience was used in 2021 to do that.
Here's a devil's advocate question for you. Let's say that you're Leffen and you dealt with the nonsense of evidence.zip and you've learned from your mistakes. You chilled out for your year ban in Sweden or whatever, and you're ready to put that behind you. And maybe not everything about that was exposed, and there are still some things that were not discovered or discussed or whatever. There's some accounts that are forever locked behind that. At what point can you say, "Hey, this video is basically attacking my personal character, and it's defamation," and
He could sue. Yeah, if he
yeah,
thinks it's defamation, he can sue. But I think on a certain level, someone's making an art piece. You just gotta own, and you can say, hey, I don't think this is correct or whatever. But at the same time, it wasn't defamation. He's literally like the protagonist of his documentary. He's the protagonist of this documentary. And like for the hero's journey, like the point of the documentary is that Leffen is redeemed. In the documentary, Leffen is redeemed. For him to be redeemed, there had to be something that goes wrong in the
right,
first place. So
right,
it does not portray Leffen like as evil, even. It does not. It just shows the stuff that he actually did, and then it ultimately redeems him.
right,
And he, I don't know, it's really gross. He unredeems himself by saying that none of that should be seen or talked about or noticed anymore. It's all done with.
right.
And it's a really ridiculous standard, and it's totally
Right.
revisionist.
It is.
Um,
I wonder, and I'm trying to be as charitable as possible. If I
yeah.
had something really bad on my record, if I had something where I mass harassed people, or I don't know, something crazy, and I paid my time, I did my time for it, I acknowledged it at one point, and maybe again there are elements of it maybe that I didn't wholly acknowledge, but then in the future, like how many like can YouTubers make essays every month talking about this about me, and like that's my reputation? I just have to live with that now, and maybe I do because I made those mistakes in the past, and that's the consequence. Or is there a
Um,
line where you say, "Hey, I think we've talked about it. We talked about it to death. We know what happened. Does not represent who he is as a person now, although that could be debated for Leffen specifically. But I'm saying theoretically, like what do you do with that?
I think on some level, you have to own it and lead by example that you've improved. And if people do continue to do that, your clear example of better behavior will, I think, win out. I think it
Mm-hmm.
should end up winning out. And I think if people are continually harassing you about something you did 10, 11 years ago that you paid your dues for, I think that they are in the wrong, and we should point out, hey, that's not fair. And that's just such a far cry from Samox.
Right.
It's such an incredibly far cry.
I agree.
Yeah. Yeah, not just a random internet commenter. Yeah, and so people are kind of saying that that's what Hacks is doing, is dredging this stuff out, but the metagame stuff was never there's never been accountability on metagame being censored. And so that drives Hacks fucking sorry, it drives him crazy. Um uh yeah, and makes him freak out, and then all the people coming to his defense
Right.
without ever acknowledging that it's been censored,
Yes.
and that Leffen caused it to be censored, which kind of undoes whatever. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I kind of think of by contrast, Zero,
Right.
who did something wrong, did something definitely wrong, and I think Zero, I think the ban on Zero is justified. I think if you do, I think a no tolerance policy around anything related to um, sexual misconduct around kids is a no tolerance thing in the Smash community.
Right.
Um, but that doesn't mean 11 years later you should be going into his comments to like call him some evil pedophile who should be hung. Like that's crazy. That's way crazy. Um, uh, um, um, yeah. So like for example with Zero, I don't think we should ever forget what happened.
Right.
But and same with Leffen, I don't think we should forget it. And I don't even think the metagame censoring thing is like, oh, he should be excised from the community for this. I think that's part of the problem is that the only form of justice that we have is instant permaban. Um and maybe we can just point and say like, hey, yeah, that's not good. Like please don't do that in the future. But I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah,
It's
it's
all really
messy.
frustrating.
I also want to really quick take the perspective of Hacks, and let's say you're familiar with the maybe a fuller extent of the damage that Leffen did to people and individuals, and that is
Mhm.
not that is something that is being actively suppressed, and you're under this impression that you're the only person that knows everything, and the only way this
Yeah,
information
you're
will be
actually
known.
the only person with evidence.zip. You actually have
Yeah,
the document.
yeah.
Yeah.
So then I would feel the burden, personally speaking. I'm saying if I was in Hacks' position, I would feel the burden to
Yeah.
say I need to do something about this. I need to create one video that lays it all out, explains it, and it goes over every detail. And because Hacks is so thorough, I mean, he made Box, and he has video essays on how SDI changes because of. I mean, he has this very meticulous, very thorough style of creating content and like looking at the world and like looking at things. So I'm sorry that some people couldn't stomach the content of it. But that's just how he is. That's the kind of guy he is. That's the kind of content he's gonna make.
Yeah.
And if I had the burden of that I felt that he had, I would be inclined to make something like that probably, and maybe even accidentally tiptoe too far into hyperbolic territory because I'm feeling this pressure, and so you might kind of go a little farther than you intend to in a few ways. And all being said, I don't think it's that crazy what he did. I think it's very much I think it's he obviously did a few distasteful
Yeah.
things and a few exaggerations, but overall, I don't think it's that.
It's totally crazy. I have never managed to have a conversation with one of these people, so I don't know if they really think it's that crazy. They kind of like pitter and patter around with each other on Twitter, but I
They
don't know.
they basically they go back to the analogy of the Hitler quote, which was Hitler
Yeah.
was quoted, and they go back to like the pants thing. And I think him wearing a certain kind of pants like that, sure, that's reaching, but is that enough of a concern for a ban? I don't. If I made a video tomorrow and I made a hit piece on you and I said Drew was trying to humiliate me on my live stream yesterday because he wore an orange shirt and he knows my least favorite color is orange, should I get banned? Was I harassing you for that? No, I don't think that's. I think that's ridiculous. Like what?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think you should be basically allowed to just like say if you think abuse is going on. Um, okay, we didn't talk about alcohol. So we had a tangent where we talked about all the nature of actually coming out with things or not.
Yeah.
'Cause I paused you from the alcohol thing.
Yes.
Yeah, alcohol is super confusing for what it does socially. Um, I think in like um in like a feminist worldview, the a concept of consent is like very fleshed out, and I do find myself very partial to that. But but uh there's some contradictions that come up around our narratives around alcohol. So it's very confusing that you can that if you drink really at all, you're in some sense unable to consent to doing anything. Um uh because you're not responsible for your own body. Um but for certain crimes, we claim that you are actually fully responsible for your own body, even under the effects of alcohol. It's very confusing. It doesn't really make sense. Like it's a double standard. It doesn't really make sense.
Hmm.
Um, and I've never heard someone manage to make sense of both things at once.
Hmm.
If you can't consent to things when you're drunk, then and because people want to say, well, you can't just blame alcohol for being drunk for your problems. And it's like, well, if you can't consent to anything, you're not like a moral agent then when you're drunk. You're not in your right mind. You're not thinking clearly. You might not remember the actions that you're doing. Um, on some level you are. The person who is responsible for it is the sober person who got themselves drunk.
Right.
So there is like moral responsibility for those crimes, but we don't go that far back for regarding the consent arguments because that ends up being kind of victim blaming, understandably, because you don't want to thrash someone for something horrible that happens to them, but there's just a lot of statistics that just a lot of horrible things happen when people are really drunk. People get more violent, people get hurt more. All manner of like really horrific things just happen more on alcohol. And so, um, yeah, it's just really weird that we like place all this moral value on the decisions that a person makes while drunk, in certain contexts and then not in others. And
Yeah.
it just doesn't make any
I
sense.
think the most straightforward way to go about it is simply immoral to be a drunkard because you're absolving yourself of your moral agency. That's your way of saying that I can do whatever I want, and that immediately disqualifies you as having being in the moral right in every context and situation. And what I thought was really interesting is Mango, posted a little bit after this ETOS thing and said, I always get dragged into these discussions whenever people talk about alcohol stuff.
Yeah.
And he goes, look, I think it was really stupid to be blackout drunk at one point. And I would never do that now with what I know now. But, I did back in the day or whatever, and I just wouldn't do that anymore. And to me, that's the biggest disconnect because I think a lot of people just haven't grown up and haven't thought about
Mhm.
these consequences and things. And I was talking to Technicals recently, and I was asking him, in your view, do you think there's more scandal in the Melee community or more scandal in the Ultimate? He goes, oh, the Ultimate
Melee.
community has way more.
Oh.
Is what he said, and I thought that's interesting because, in my opinion, it's possible that there's
Well,
probably about
yeah.
the same, but things were less documented and things were less. There was less read receipts, to put it bluntly, because things were less living in the digital world when Melee was younger and more immature. So my actual opinion is probably about the same, but we have a closer magnifying glass on the issues and problems now because of the technology that we have, and because Ultimate is a younger game and a younger scene. I think we're seeing it more writ at large now. If you look at the 2020 like Me Too stuff, the vast majority were Ultimate. Some of the biggest scandals were all Ultimate and Smash 4 and stuff.
That's true.
But that doesn't mean it doesn't happen in Melee. It just means we don't know about what happened in Melee.
Yeah, Melee's a lot more. I was gonna say there have been, I think, more incidents like that in Ultimate, although Ultimate is younger and also bigger.
Yeah.
Um, but Melee is a lot more. I don't know how do I say. It's a lot more insular and a lot more aggressive about things. There has probably been more or an equal number of accusations in the Melee community as in the Ultimate community, but I think the average accusation within the Melee community is like of much less. I was going over the do you know La Luna, the moon?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, a top 100, I think it was top 20, top 30 Marth player was canceled in 2021.
I heard about this.
And um, well, it's hard to even find stuff because a lot of the documentation has been deleted off Twitter. Um, but I think there were a decent number of these. Oh, I don't know how to say it. I'm not. I don't have this well formed enough to make a great point about La Luna. Um, there was a case with DJ Nintendo. No. Um, hold on. Wait. Let me make sure I'm not forgetting the person. DJ Nintendo.
Okay. I want to read what my brother said in the meantime while you're searching
Yeah, go
that.
ahead.
Exodus 21,
No,
28.
not DJ Nintendo.
If a bull gores a man or a woman to death, the bull is to be stoned to death, and its meat must not be eaten, but the owner of the bull must not be held responsible. If, however, the bull has had the habit of goring, and the owner has been warned and has not kept it penned up, and it kills a man or a woman, the bull is to be stoned, and its owner also to be put to death. There's further stipulations there, but the principle being taught is, hey, the bull is doing damage. It isn't directly in your control, and you're not totally responsible. But if you know that it is so and don't properly restrain it, you are liable. That's a great illustration. I'm really glad you brought that up. Just like alcohol example, you may act differently, but once you know you're drinking and escaping responsibility, you're culpable. 100%. I completely agree with that.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was D1.
Okay.
It was D1. He had a case where now there may have been some other particular factors that made it worse than I'm remembering because I don't remember all the details. But the crux of the story was that he had a hookup one night with a girl, and they both claimed to have been blackout drunk. And
Great start.
yeah, yeah, that's a great start. Um, and something that's really confusing as a guy is that if you're drunk and she's drunk, you're raping her. It's very confusing. That is the perspective of basically everyone. And maybe there's some societally good reasons for that. To say like, well, men be really extra careful, you know, really there's a higher moral emphasis put on the man to be more responsible there. Maybe for good reasons. But it's very confusing. Yeah, our way of handling alcohol situations, it really doesn't make sense. And I don't know. People want to say you can't blame the alcohol, but it's just like it will. And when we have a culture that's constantly just accepting people to get completely drunk and not know what's going on, and then when they do something crazy, we completely destroy them for it. We're setting people up to fail,
Yeah.
and yeah, we're causing undue harm because we're addicted to a drug. Like we can't
Yes.
let this drug go, or we can't create better boundaries around the use of the drug. um
Yep.
and people won't some people would say like, oh, with ethos, like, okay, just don't drink anymore at tournaments. And then people are saying, well, that's, what's the word? um
Sorry, Donnie just said, hey, I have a button that can either make me laugh really hard or blow up an orphanage. It's totally random. You can't blame me for pushing the button. I just wanted to laugh really hard.
There's an element of that with drinking. Oh yeah, because and a lot of people will get really upset because of like, well, I would never do that while drunk, and it's like, sure, you wouldn't, but some people would, and also a lot of people who would don't know that they would until they do it when they're drunk. So like, maybe you don't know for sure. Do you know for sure that you wouldn't do that while drunk? Maybe you have a ton of experience getting blackout drunk, but the first few times you did. Um, okay, I have a. This is a okay. This is a bit vulnerable for me to share. It's a little dangerous for me to share. When I was a I am an active sleeper. I'm an active sleeper. Like when I was a kid, I once at a sleepover, I slept walked out of their house in the middle of the night and wandered into a neighbor's abandoned house. And then they called the cops and sent helicopters looking for me, and then eventually woke me up in the house next door.
Wow.
I've often, I've had some night terrors where I just like in the middle of the night while asleep, just run out of the room just screaming, and then I come to and like, oh, I'm awake now. um I've sleptwalked all around the house. I've went and gotten food. I've had conversations with people while completely asleep, and so this created so hookup culture creates some real problems with that. Um, I had a my first girlfriend. We were together for 5 years, and I definitely woke her up while I was asleep and tried to engage sexually. Most of my girlfriends this happened at some point and that becomes very confusing in hookup culture because it's like I have to warn them like, hey, if we're sleeping in the same bed, this is really freaking weird, but hey, wake you up, you can slap me or stop me or whatever.
Hmm.
I walk around and talk and and I'm not conscious during it. And it's really upsetting and really confusing. Um, uh, so um, and so for that reason, um, even when I have like hookups with people, I can't like sleep in the same bed with them unless they're like really, really, really okay with that idea. And I've had some very awkward nights where like things were going great, and I'm like, you should know it's not something that happens often, you know, but like with my current girlfriend, we've lived together a year. It's happened 3, 4 times over the course of 300 days. So more than a 1% chance. And so like if that happens, if you need to be able to say no. And often for me, it's really uncomfortable because something gets started and then I come to and I'm like, now I'm engaged in something I don't want to do because I'm conscious in something I don't want to do. Um, it's extremely confusing,
Hmm.
extremely, extremely confusing. And I can only imagine. So, anyways, with drinking, that's why I just wouldn't get. That's a big reason why I wouldn't get blackout drunk. You don't, when you're not conscious, you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to say I wouldn't do that when I was super drunk, and maybe you wouldn't do that, but maybe you would do something else that you wouldn't do while drunk. If you just look at statistics, people do a lot of stuff while drunk that they would never do normally. Like people want
Yeah.
to say, "Oh, that's something that's hidden deep inside." It's like, no, it brings down your walls, and you do stuff that you wouldn't do otherwise. Like,
Right.
um, s- alcohol is like one of the biggest causes of sexual violence.
Right.
Um, or even like child sexual violence. It's actually like one of the biggest predictors. In fact, when it comes to it's very bizarre, but alcohol use around children is a bigger predictor of child sexual assault than being a pedophile.
Hmm.
Most people who assault children are not actual literal pedophiles who are fantasizing about children all the time. Often they are under the influence and they're alone and weird weird stuff happens.
Okay.
And obviously horrendous, obviously so completely despicably horrendous. But the alcohol like has a causal impact on that.
Right.
It's not a coincidence. Yeah.
Hmm. I guess the thing that and you're preaching to the choir in terms of how terrible this is and how terrible alcoholism can be. I guess my question is, how do we, if you want to like try to, I don't know, change people's minds about maybe alcohol not being a necessity at these functions, or at least
Yeah.
not as deeply ingrained? What do
Yeah.
we do about like starting a conversation about, hey, maybe we don't need to pair like, you know, partying with these tournaments. We don't need to pair heavy drinking with tournaments. I mean,
Well, I
you
don't
want a
know that you
laundry
can
list
do
of
anything about that because the partying isn't happening at the tournament venue. I
right,
think the tournament venues handle these things, as far as I can tell, pretty well. I don't think not, I don't know of any of the crazy allegations that have ever happened, if they've ever happened in the venues
sure,
of the
but it's
tournament.
still
So
the
this
culture.
one with Etost happened at Guildhouse, like a bar. I believe they're a bar.
Yeah,
They certainly serve alcohol.
but it's a
Um,
cultural reality, even if it's not
yeah,
affiliated or directly
part of
related
the
to the
culture.
tournament. It's the
Yeah.
culture. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
It's a
I'm not talking about like, oh, let's enforce a policy. That's not going to work. People are always going to get
yeah,
around
but
that.
like a
I'm just talking about
cultural.
how do we have a conversation that starts changing, because I think this is my assumption. It is the expectation. If you are someone inclined towards partying and drinking, it is the thing you do. It is like just this understood, well, of course, it's Saturday night, it's Friday night, or whatever, I'm going to get like hammered. How do we undo that expectation? Like, you don't have to do that and have a good time and go
Yeah.
to a tournament?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. Um, I don't know. I have no idea.
So, Boosh, shaming
Drug
people.
use.
Hey, Google Shoes, how's it going? I don't know about shaming. I don't know if shaming will work because
Yeah, maybe
you know what?
pitying.
People tried shaming.
Pity them.
I don't even know if that will work. I think shaming people doesn't work for like the cigarette stuff. Like cigarettes are coming back like a lot for younger generations, and shaming. There's a whole campaign of shaming that was attempted. It didn't do anything really. I mean, people feel ashamed when they smoke cigarettes,
Yeah.
certainly, but it doesn't curb the
and then
behavior.
alcoholics certainly feel shame when they get super drunk. They definitely do.
Some
If
of
you've
them.
ever seen some, yeah, some, not all, but some of them. But a lot of the people I know who have bad relationships with alcohol, many of their alcohol freakouts started from feeling ashamed about themselves while drunk, and then they start, I'm sure you've seen drunk people who are just sobbing about how horrible they are or whatever. That's one way in which an alcoholic can kind of.
Hmm.
I had a friend growing up. One of my best friends growing up had not just an alcohol problem, a drug problem generally, but the drug that caused the most problems socially was alcohol. Um, yeah, and certainly did would just do. I mean, it was just me. My first experience was drinking were me and my two best friends drinking in our thing or whatever, and then we ultimately had to stop kind of drinking with one of the friends because he would get extremely depressed. He might start self-harming or whatever during it, or uh, getting violent or whatever, in ways that yeah, he wouldn't when he wasn't. So boundaries are one thing. So when I'm with that friend and when he comes over, when my boundaries like, we're not gonna drink. I'm not, like, you're coming to my house, you're not gonna drink. I know, I love you, I love you, I love you, but I made this vow 10 years ago. I'm sure things have changed, but boy, if they didn't, I would feel like such an idiot
Hmm.
if you had a big freak out while drunk 10 years later
Hmm.
as a man and not a child anymore, a giant man, and have one of these freakouts.
Right.
That's just a boundary that I'm gonna hold up. Um,
And that's good. And I don't know if that's shaming. I'm not sure what that approach
yeah,
is.
I try not to shame with it.
So Grant in
In
chat is
particular,
saying,
actually, in that group I had, the other friend employed shame.
okay,
It usually didn't work that well,
hmm.
and mostly set them apart from each other. It made it
Yeah, and
hard for
that's what I'm
them.
wondering. But I mean, Grant's saying
Yeah.
shaming 100% does work. It has to be the popular culture and not from a small subset or an institution. It has to be the right people who shame. It can't be the man. And in other words,
Mhm.
so I'm interested. So I mean, Grant, if you have any thoughts on that, who is the right person? Like, if you want to take the Smash scene for example, is it top players? Is it TOs? Is it just like cultural figureheads, or is it nothing to do with authority at all?
It's
I
probably top players.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something that's kind of weird about the Smash community is because it's a community founded on our fundamental thing is weekly hierarchy contests.
Yeah, it's true.
Um and yeah, it seems as if a well-spoken top player would
Yeah.
have the most moral authority to say and do a lot of these
I think
things.
Donnie's right. Scar, Toph, Ludwig, top players,
Oh
opinion
yeah, absolutely.
makers.
Someone like Scar Toph. In fact, Scar probably has the most moral authority within the community.
Hmm.
When he
You're
talks,
right.
people would listen.
I think you're right about that. Yeah.
Um, um, yeah. I don't know. Yeah, it's so confusing how you. I don't know. I have no idea how you get people to stop doing
Yeah.
bad things. Uh, yeah, I think I mean,
Leading
we
by
shouldn't
example
need
helps a
drugs
lot.
to connect. Yeah, we
Leading
shouldn't
by
need
example.
drugs to connect with each other.
Yeah. Yeah. What I will tell you
We
from
should.
personal
Yeah.
experience is I would very often be the guy that would go to parties and then just not drink anything. I didn't want to. I had enough energy and I'm already an extrovert, so I get plenty of energy
Okay,
from being around
you're the
people.
buzzkill Christian.
Right, exactly. And
Have
perception,
water, please.
certainly. But one of the funniest things I ever got, with the feedback I got, was from a friend. She's like, "You know what? You are the best non-drunk person to be at a party with. You're the most fun." I'm like, "All right, I did it. Like that's I want that reputation." But you stick out by example. So if you show up and you don't drink and you participate and you have a good time and you engage, I think that can make a huge difference. And how you speak and all that. From personal experience, people have asked me about that a lot, and it's always been positive. But I'm sure anyone that's felt negatively about it will just ignore me, or they'll like just not invite me to things or whatever. But that hasn't really
The
affected
easiest
it.
drunk people can be so annoying. The easiest way to handle a drunk person is to cope with being drunk yourself. That makes it the most
Mm,
most fun. Wouldn't you want to just be around a bunch of sober people when you're sober?
that's a good point.
I think that's something that pushes people to be drunk. Everyone's kind of annoying, and then you get to also be annoying yourself and let
Yeah.
go. Yeah, I think there's an element of that people use drinking to let go. I think because you mentioned that whole like um you said being a drunkard is immoral because you're just absolving yourself of, and I think that for many that's an element of why they are drinking is to let themselves go without all of their discomforts, insecurities, shame, whatever. Um, so I know for me, I am horribly insecure about dancing. I feel I like dancing by myself. I usually feel very confident in social situations. If it's people start dancing and I'm supposed to start dancing with them, I get extremely uncomfortable and insecure. I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna look like such an idiot around these people. I'm normally so calm and cool and collected. Now I'm gonna be revealed as the total fool that I've always been. And I'll say the only times I've ever really enjoyed dancing was while very under the influence of alcohol. Um, and that's one reason people don't like to talk about, but that's one reason people get drunk and have sex is because they have a lot of shame about or discomfort or difficulty
Right.
being in their body or whatever, and having that glass of wine before they do it lets them let their walls down,
Yeah.
and be vulnerable. On one hand, yeah, so I think not repressing things, I think, is one way to help because that's part of I think one of the functions of alcohol is it lets you let your walls down and let things out. And so um, maybe if you're more comfortable just doing that generally, one of the big appeals of alcohol isn't going to be there. You're not going to suddenly be able to say the things that you never had the courage to say before if you're comfortable saying or thinking or feeling whatever it is. And then you'll be able to do it a little more responsibly. um, yeah, so I think encouraging sincerity. I think this is one of the things that I was hoping to talk about with Dalton. Is one of the Nick Fuentes things is they're constantly super irony. They're like ironic all the time. And I think a lot of the online stuff, even not just them, even the far left online stuff is just like extremely ironic all the time and all jokes all the time.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to be like sincere about how you feel. Being sincere is like super cringe, and you wouldn't
Right.
want to be cringe.
Yeah. That's
Um,
well put.
yeah. And um and so I think alcohol sometimes serves as a way that people feel like they can be sincere without being judged because they've been absolved a bit. They're drunk and kind of
I see.
out of it a bit.
Hmm. Like if you're
And
committing the sin of being sincere while you're sober, then we can make fun of you because
yeah,
that's pathetic.
yeah. I think that there's an element of that. Um, anyways, with drinking, that's one of the parts that feels freeing about drinking is not just that the drug literally makes you more willing to, it really pulls down your inhibitions, it really does that, but also the people around you know that you're drunk, and so they're getting like this little peek, and you're also somewhat absolved of what you say, but
Yeah.
you're not absolved if it's bad enough.
Yeah. Right.
Um, yeah, and so um, yeah, I don't know. I feel like if you weren't, yeah, I don't drink much. I smoke weed pretty often. And the effects of the two are very different. Um, um, I would never want to be around another person while I'm high because I would get so insecure and self-conscious.
Hmm.
It's almost like the reverse.
Hmm.
But maybe I'll think of all sorts of interesting things. Whereas when I'm drunk, I'm not going to think of new interesting thoughts or ideas. But it'll feel like I'm being more myself or something.
Huh.
In any case, I'm pretty wary around alcohol. It's fun, but I wouldn't want to do it alone. Drinking alone seems really like it doesn't go well for the people who are drinking alone. And then when you do it in public, it's just kind of dangerous. Even if you're in a super safe environment, you really have to be around people that you know are going to take care of you.
Right.
And there's just so many people that think they're in that environment where the people around them they know and they love are going to take care of them, and they just weren't able to. I think
Yeah.
back about the few times I got super drunk in public. When I was in Europe, I was 20. The drinking age is 21 in America, but it's 18 in Spain.
Right.
Maybe 16. I don't even
It's
remember.
16 in Germany at least. I think it's 18 in
Yeah.
Spain.
And so every night us college students were going out to these different clubs and stuff, and two of the nights I got just completely hammered. And the people around me actually noticed, like, oh, this kid who's, usually pretty careful and stuff. Oh, wow, he's really drunk. And they were very relentless about walking me home.
Hmm.
Maybe I didn't need, maybe like I would have been, I probably would have been fine getting home on my own. But it was very responsible of them to do so, and very irresponsible of myself to put myself in a spot where I depended on people to do it. And the second time it happened, yeah, yeah, I was at going from club to club with this girl and her brother that I met from Canada in a hostel in Edinburgh, and things were going really well with the girl until she realized I was too drunk. She's like, "We're gonna walk you home to your
Hmm.
hostel." And I was very disappointed. And then I get back to my hostel that has a public bathroom, and I threw up for 3 hours and fell asleep in front of the toilet,
Hmm.
passed out for the next 6 hours
Hmm.
at a public toilet.
Does that sound
Could have gotten
pleasant?
alcohol poisoning.
Yeah.
Could have gotten alcohol poisoning. Like that was not safe.
Does
None of
not
that
sound
was
good.
safe.
Yeah.
And like a lot of bad things could have happened. And yeah, and when I don't know, it gets super confusing because people say, well, when something bad happens to you when you're in that, you were taken advantage of course. Um and and so they'll say, well, you're victim blaming for pointing that out because it is the other person who took advantage of you, and that's definitely true. Um, but it was very irresponsible for your sober self to get completely incapable of taking care of yourself
Right.
in public. That was like really irresponsible.
Yeah.
And then someone did something really horrible or something. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's a hard line to get around. But yeah, I don't like the like yeah, it just doesn't seem like a great norm to just get
No.
like crazy, crazy
Definitely
out of
not.
your mind, inebriated, and then let other
No.
people
And there's a great comment here by
take care of
Donnie,
you.
my brother again. He says, it's one of the greatest failures of the Smash scene that the Me Too movement in Smash had lots of popular support from grassroots, was co-opted by the top players and routed to platitudes that didn't actually change anything instead of addressing an actual issue like drinking and alcohol. And I guess that's my root frustration with the how it was how it's all handled. So obviously, someone does something bad enough. It doesn't matter if they're drunk enough; they're out, and they are. And again, you and I have talked about this before. One of the things that you said that you've admired about Christianity is the aspect of forgiveness, And from a Christian point of view, every single person has done something cancelable, has done something ban worthy. Everyone has. And so it's not about, well, we just have to all just do the right thing. We have to be better. No, we've all screwed up. I'm sorry. None of us can do better. We're basically in a spot where we can't be redeemed. But we can forgive and we can love people and we can set them up for success. And so what happens with Smash is you go, here's a game everyone loves. Oh, we're just going to like drink and fool around or whatever. And we're going to like pretend we care about consent and all these platitudes and things. But we're really not going to like actually solve the vice of it where it's like, oh, we kind of like drinking and stuff. We kind of like doing all this crazy stuff. And we're not actually going to remove the part that the vice that the root problem is. We're just going to kind of dance around it and hope that it kind of takes care of itself. And if someone speaks up a little too loud,
people.
Yeah, and if someone speaks up a little too loud, then we'll just like, bury the problem by just banning them and like just throwing them out.
Yeah.
That's not loving or caring or truthful or anything good. It's all just anyway. So I think I don't know what you and I have talked about a little bit about like what we do about this, but I guess like just shouting from the rooftops that like maybe it just starts with you don't have to get drunk at Smash tournaments. Let's like start with that, I guess.
Yeah.
You don't have to.
And also maybe if you do just like some moderation, like maybe like
you can drink. You can drink maybe.
A shot, 2 beers, a shot, 2 shots.
Yeah, but the problem with that is
also a shot gets me pretty down, but like yeah.
But the problem with that though is like if you have a predisposition to getting drunk and you have an alcohol problem, you know what one little drink means. It's the same thing with sin. Like it talks about sin in the Bible. It's like the way that it works is you say, oh, I'll just do one little thing. It's like I'm not like completely jumping over, and then as soon as you've done that, you've completely given into your vice. And that's how addiction works. That's how like vices work. That's how sin works.
Yeah. So I think when someone has, depending on how bad the thing is that they do when they're drunk, if it's bad enough, I guess it's too dangerous for the future. But I think for a lot of things, if it's a one-off event where they violate someone's boundaries while drunk, they have definitely lost their drinking at tournaments pass.
Right.
For sure.
If you can't demonstrate. Exactly. Yeah. And it has to be way more. We have to have different definitions for like what constitutes as a problematic drinking, because it can't just escalate to like, oh, you touched someone sexually without consent. That is way, way too far down the line. We need to back up way earlier from that. Run from the very side of evil, exactly. And different people have different vices. So me personally, I can have a little bit of alcohol and it doesn't affect me. Like I'm not tempted to get drunk. I just am not for whatever reason. My genes, my interests, what I value doesn't happen. But for someone else, like one drink can like completely.
Have you ever been super drunk?
I've been I don't know how you define super drunk, but I've had a couple of shots.
Have you ever thrown up from alcohol?
I have thrown up from alcohol.
Okay.
But it wasn't because of amount of alcohol. It was because I mixed things I shouldn't have mixed. Yeah.
I see.
So it wasn't in volume, but yeah. And I can confidently tell you, I don't need to do that again at all. I'm very happy never drinking again a day in my life. I'd have a milkshake any day over alcohol. It's cheaper. I like milkshakes more. Happy to do that. I make a very good Mormon. I don't drink coffee. I don't like alcohol.
Someone who says, if someone violates my boundaries and they're still allowed at my tournament, that's not okay. I think it depends partly on what the boundaries are. I don't know that instant permanent exile is a reasonable solution.
Also, what are your boundaries? We have to get really specific about what boundaries are, because some people have a lot of things about personal space that are not reasonable necessarily. So it depends. Also,
something some people had mentioned that in some cultures, kissing on the cheek is not that big a deal.
Right.
That said, I don't think it was even necessarily the kiss on the cheek, but the forcefulness.
Sure.
Of it.
Drew, I want to be mindful of time. You said you had to stop at 1.
Yeah. I should get going in a little bit.
Okay. I just want to make sure we haven't lost track of time.
Well, criminal things have a process by which to handle them. I don't think that someone doing something criminal necessarily means endless permanent exile. For example, I want to give 2 non-sexual examples. Plank, who ran Pound 5, stole money from the scene because do you know about Pound Five?
Oh,
Basically, I actually was at that tournament in 2011. Um, he ran Pound Five, and basically he had a contract with the hotel to sell out a certain number of hotel rooms, and then Smashers stuck like 12 people in every room, so they didn't sell
as
as
they
many
do.
hotel rooms
Yep.
as expected. And then he had to fulfill that contract, and then he used the prize pool to do so. And so some notable players like Armada didn't get a big prize pool, and some other people didn't get thousands of dollars. He stole thousands of dollars. Um, that's an example. That's really really bad, and maybe, yeah, maybe he should not be in a position of power anymore. That's pretty bad. But I don't think that that means permanent exile. I think you could allow that person back in the scene eventually, maybe with certain constraints. The same thing happened at the same year. Holy crap! Genesis 2, when crap, the NorCal oh, what was the name of the crew? God, it's been so long. The name of the crew that would run Genesis way back in the day.
I don't know.
Oh, it was Zelgadis, I think. Yeah, it was Zelgadis who did Shine Blind. Zelgadis stole the Genesis 2 prize pool, but they caught him and like took it from him, and I think he got like arrested over it or something,
Oh
and
my
then he was banned
gosh.
for a really long time. Um,
Hmm.
and even that is something that I think like, you know, yeah, that deserves some justice. But I don't think that's permanent. And then, so then Butch Zero says it's not up to a scene to rehabilitate unruly players. I actually disagree. I think if the scene were literally just a video game, but for a lot of people, we're telling them that like this is the social circle that you can like be a part of. This is something you can be a part of, and I think that if we're saying like you can be here and find community here, we actually do need to have some way um we do need some way to rehabilitate and deal with mistakes within the scene. Depending on the mistakes, of course, there are going to be mistakes that are red lines. And so the question is, what is a red line? What kind of thing is a red line? People are going to say sexual assault. Well, certain a kiss on the cheek is sexual assault. Um, Both of you being drunk, you're sexually assaulting each other. It's confusing. There's a lot of just like confusing elements. You mentioned there should be rules for TOs written about that stuff, but even then, it's like there's so many situations and weird, bizarro occurrences that could happen. Um, like the legal system tries to deal with this, and it's so insanely complicated. You have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to get the education to handle that system. But I do think that in terms of, at least, do we have a duty to try to rehabilitate players? We do. I think we do have a duty to try to rehabilitate players. I think that one of the things I think is really good about religion is I think church is a really good thing about religion. I think that that's something that all of us are kind of suffering from in this modern secular world, is that we don't have spaces where we all come together for some common purpose with a common values and community. And I think that uh yeah, I think when we let, for example, on certain boundaries that people have to do with other people talking about stuff on the internet, and then they're a victim of some kind of internet harassment, but maybe nothing happens when they're in person. So is that victim of that internet maybe harassment being exiled from the community because the perpetrator is there? Um, I feel like all of these are just justifications for all crimes have infinite punishment.
Right.
Um, and I think that's kind of what the mob rule kind of stuff lends
Yeah.
itself towards. And so we really just have to have more um, clearer bounds on and clearer moderation
Yeah.
on how things can be punished and what makes sense to do rehabilitation and
Yes.
what's genuinely a red line. But right now, no one's like had conversations about what's a red line and what's not.
Yeah.
Basically, we've shouted at stuff and people figure out the red line by poking the red line and then they
Yes.
get banned and then you saw that guy get banned, you're like, I guess that's the red line.
Yes.
Um
It's like just the Overton window and like a guess about,
mhm.
you know. I want to touch on one thing you said about the utility of the church. I'm not surprised at all if I were to hear like many people consider the Smash community their church. You know,
Yeah,
effectively, like that's just
yeah,
when you don't have these structures, you just kind of you kind of, and that's why people feel so strongly about um what would, like, if someone does something to harm the Smash community, they are ultimately demonic forces and Satan,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So in their worldview, where this is their church and these are their people, anything that separates them from that are literally, anti-human individuals. So
Yeah. Um yeah, and I think I mean, and there's plenty of history of different churches doing way too much to cover up crimes that people in their church has done. And
right,
so it really is a both sides thing. Like there should be accountability for the people actually making the rules. Right now there's no accountability for making the rules. The people making the rules are above any accountability the TOs have, essentially ultimate power. And every time anyone complains about a TO, the big tournament organizer force of, you don't know how hard it is. It's really tough being a TO.
hmm,
Like I've been a player, I've been a tournament organizer, and being a tournament organizer is way harder. It's like, well, yeah, it's a job. You're working. But I've also worked a job
hmm,
yeah, I get you're working for 2 weeks in preparation for your big tournament. It's a job for sure. But that doesn't mean that you're above all accountability for everything
right,
that that you do.
right.
Yeah, yes, there's a big lobbying. They have a big lobby. The tournament organizers have this big lobby. I think in part it's because giving tournament organizers ultimate authority over banning people lets people ban more people that they don't want in the scene.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's a very pro ban, and that's why I kind of like the unban image that I think I just don't think I don't think banning should be our very first and only real go-to option for handling players. I don't think it's a great way to do a community. I say this, a lot of this comes from my experience. I run a math tutoring center. I have 30 employees that I've interviewed, hired, and trained on how to teach, and 180 students. And it's my purpose um, to make it a comfortable space for everyone. Um, the lengths that I go to for I remember seeing the watching Dalton react to my mech interview and how much he finds it cringe that I care about like diversity or whatever, but like that kind of stuff is really important when you're trying to have a community full of different people. And I think a lot of people also don't realize that like diversity is really hard. It's like really hard to do. Um, part of a major part of diversity, like they instantly banning people for any transgression harms diversity. It absolutely harms diversity, genuine diversity. There has to be more, I don't know, nuanced ways of handling.
The word diversity is so funny because diversity isn't itself a virtue. There are benefits of diversity in certain aspects, but diversity isn't in and of itself anything like virtuous. Like having a bunch of different colored rabbits instead of one colored rabbit as a pet isn't better or
Oh,
worse. You
yeah,
know?
that's fair.
Yeah. So I think maybe I don't want to speak for Dalton, but maybe has a very specific idea about what he thinks in his head is diversity. Maybe you have a different
Yeah,
one.
yeah, yeah.
I think, yeah, that's just what I think about that.
Well, yeah, I think some people they don't really value diversity very much. In some ways, right-leaning people who just don't value diversity as a concept in some ways, I appreciate that over left-wing people who pay lip service to diversity, but actually don't
Right.
care about it.
Right.
And that's really frustrating for me as someone who just sincerely thinks like diversity is a good thing, because I think like there's all sorts of interesting people who come from all sorts of interesting places, and
Right.
it's we have to all work pretty hard to make sure
Yeah.
that the space that we're in lets all the different kinds of people flourish to the best of their ability.
Yeah. If you want to talk about beauty, um, there's beauty in the world because there are differences. You know, there's different colors, there's different experiences. Those are all manifestations of diversity. If you want to tackle a problem and you have 5 different perspectives,
Mhm.
those are diverse perspectives by definition. You're not having one person solve a problem, you're having 5 people solve a problem, and that can make the problem solving better. So there's certain applications to diversity that are good, but again, diversity in and of itself isn't this magically good thing. But when applied in certain ways, and when you understand it in certain ways, of course, but it's not. It's sort of like puppeted as like this. They talk about progress, like, man, on this board, on this executive board of this
Oh yeah.
company, as long as we have like equal parts of every kind of race
Yeah.
and gender represented,
Yeah, yeah,
we've
yeah.
made it. It's like, well, what have we made exactly?
I do think, actually, in my heart, I do think that diversity is a good thing. But I think there's a lot of things that can look like diversity and aren't necessarily diversity. I think there is a certain kind of corporate diversity where, Disney making their show, they show that like, oh, they have these different checklists of
Right.
things that they do, and I don't know if that's totally sincere. Or I think it makes the content maybe not feel sincere. It's like a kind of pseudo diversity. I don't know. In any case, I think it's just really difficult to have lots of different people around. Yeah,
Yeah.
so a lot of my frustration with the community is as someone who organizes and manages a community and tries to create a positive environment for people to do something that's for most of them, it's really traumatic. Like you really have to have it be a very positive environment, because math for a lot of kids is super traumatic and painful and anxiety filling. So it needs to be positive, and
Right.
and then the people in it are, yeah, very diverse all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, yeah, and so I think the people who pay lip service to diversity and then suddenly are not very diversity minded, I think it goes to show that actually diversity is just really hard. We think it's going to be really easy. You just like uh, you look at who has been oppressed, and you prop them up, and you say that that's diversity, and maybe that's one element of it, but then there's a whole lot of other elements of of um of diversity. It's hard to do. Problems are going to come up, and you're going to have to like really tackle strange judgment calls about different things where multiple people are not going to be happy, and find compromise. And yeah. Yeah. Well, anyways, I'll quit rambling about diversity. We actually didn't end up getting to the video.
Right.
I actually took some notes on it.
Oh, do we have time for that? I feel like we're
We
at
can
time.
do a little of it. We can
Okay.
do a little of it.
Okay.
I
Sure.
remember I said one is a hard stop, but that's just because of how things usually are on my calendar for the center. I actually don't have anything scheduled at 1:30 or 2, so I
Okay.
can take, I'll say, 15 minutes.
Okay. Cool.
I can take 15 minutes. I wrote down 4 of the arguments from that video that I thought were maybe more meaningful.
Okay.
Well, there was this moral argument. Yes. So David sent me a video about arguments for the existence of God. So yeah, actually, I think in our last talk, and then in this one, it was about Christianity and atheism, but I haven't really talked about like atheism much.
Yeah, not
Most of the time I
much.
talked
Yeah.
about the Christian perspective.
Yeah, you're right.
And so I think yeah, I think we could just spend a little time talking about. So he sent me this video with some of the classic theological Christian theological arguments for the existence of God. They're kind of not necessarily inherently Christian, but these are
Yeah. And by the,
definitely
and by I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts, but I will say as a caveat, I think there's a hierarchy of ones that are more compelling than others. I think some are
That's
really
right.
weak, and I think some are really a
Yeah.
lot stronger.
So I picked out 4 that I think are usually the so I picked out the moral argument, the
Mhm.
cosmological argument, teleological, and the transcendental argument.
Okay.
I think the other ones, I'd be fine with talking about the other ones, but I think that the other ones are not like
I would agree.
Pascal's Wager
Pascal's Wager is one of the
is
weakest.
interesting,
I think
but
Pascal's
it's
Wager is
not
one of the
really
weakest, actually.
not convincing especially because it's not going to lead you like I can see how fear of infinite punishment leads you to be like, okay, but then there's like so many
That's what
ideologies
I'm saying.
that
Yeah,
yeah,
if you
but
apply Pascal's
Pascal's
Wager to
Wager is
extreme, it's not just a binary choice. There's like
yeah,
50 of
exactly.
them. Like that's the whole. That's why I think it's one of the
Yeah.
weakest. Yeah.
The math argument, as someone who knows so much
I was
math,
gonna
it's
I was
always
gonna defer to you
really
on that one because I don't know much about math.
well, from what I recall, the math argument was suggesting like if you look at the Mandelbrot set, it's like infinitely recursive, and how could there be something so infinitely detailed? And um, I think well, an unanswered question in the philosophy of math is math created or discovered? Invented or discovered? Did Newton invent calculus or did he discover calculus? Often we say that he discovered it because Leibniz also discovered it, but it was a little different. Um, uh, but in other ways, sometimes it feels like you're making math when you define a new thing and you prove stuff about it, and you're
Hmm.
defining that thing for some purpose. It does feel like making something too. So it's pretty confusing, the answer to that
Interesting.
question. Um,
Hmm.
but as far as how complex math is pointing to some designer, I think actually a principle I have is that complexity usually is a result actually of the emergence of like a lot of interconnected things and not a result of meticulous design. So my two examples that are very video gamey would be Super Smash Bros. Melee was not designed to be the game that it is. It was
Right.
discovered to be the game that it is.
Hmm.
Sakurai did not the creator of the game did not build the game with that in mind. It turns out that there were all these little weird facets that you could abuse and change to, yeah, really create something that wasn't there in the first place. Or maybe Ocarina of Time speedrunning is a good one.
I want to push back on
Where
the
it's
first
so
example
insanely
though.
complicated, but wasn't designed for that.
I
Yeah,
want to
go ahead.
push back on that because it from day one of 1.02 releasing in January 2002 or whenever it was. That's the latest version. Melee is the same game as it was then. Everything was still there. It hadn't realized its full like the potential that we're playing at it now, but it still was created. Nothing new was created in the last 20 years, 23 years, 22 years. So I'm not sure if I agree with that assessment.
Well, like a lot of the complexity is accidental.
But it's still present. So it was still created. The complexity exists in the code of the game. Whether or not it's been realized is another matter.
Yeah, it was there in the code game. Sure enough, fair enough. It feels like splitting hairs, kind of. I agree with you on that.
No, I think that's one of the points that he makes in the video where I want to see if I can find it. Which argument is it? Okay, I think it's it's part of the cosmological argument where there's a thing, if everything has an act and a potency. And so the act was releasing 1.02 in January 2002, and the potency of it is our current meta game for the competitive scene. So I actually think that I don't think anything was created anew. We're all playing the same game that was created. We're just discovering new things about it.
Other than obviously our modding of it and stuff.
Of course, that's another.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Um, you could in principle play a game that ends up having such complexity and it wasn't strictly invented by a creator.
Like what?
Well, chess I don't think has a named creator, and I think many of the rules of chess have developed over time. And uh there's a complexity hidden there that's just incredibly vast.
Well, there's a very very
Despite
large
being
number of creators, but it's still creators. Someone did create it. If it's a bunch of different desperate minds all coming together at different times.
um I mean, I don't know, did they create it or did they discover it?
They created
That
it.
set of rules. It's like a set of rules.
They all created it together.
Um, did the first person who did Archimedes create pi? The value pi, like the
I think he
mathematical constant
discovered. I
pi?
think he discovered pi.
Discovered pi. So I would say if he discovered pi, I think we discovered chess. Chess is some basic, like basically mathematical rules.
That's interesting. Um, I don't think so because there's some there are arbitrary rules in chess. So we had some point we had to pick and
Arbitrary
choose.
rules in math.
Okay, can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah. They're called axioms.
Okay.
For example, uh, the ancient Greeks were masters of geometry. They were masters
Right.
of geometry, and
Mm-hmm.
they and math to the ancient Greeks was geometry, and much of this was written down by Euclid. He wrote the Elements of Euclid, which is considered the first math textbook. And he started basically the idea was he took all the knowledge that they had because he didn't invent all of it or discover all of it. He compiled a lot of it, and he started from these basic axioms, these basic postulates, assumptions.
Okay.
Two parallel lines never meet.
Mm-hmm.
If you have 2 points, you can find a line between them. These basic assumptions that you just assume, and from which sprout all of geometry. These very basic assumptions. Um, and but if you change some of those assumptions,
Mm-hmm.
totally different structures come out of it. Completely different structures come out of it. So your choice of assumption, your choice of axiom is ultimately arbitrary according to what you're interested in studying. And this really came into the forefront in kind of the late 1800s and the 1900s when so it's called Euclid's fifth postulate. Let me read it to you.
Okay.
In some sense, it is equivalent to the Pythagorean theorem.
Okay.
It's the parallel postulate. If a line segment crosses two lines in such a way that the sum of their inner angles on the same side is less than two right angles, then the lines will meet. Basically, it's saying parallel lines, lines that are not parallel will meet.
That makes sense.
And it's this like much more complicated postulate actually than the other ones. Like it has way more words than all the other ones, and everyone wanted to like basically for thousands of years there was a lot of effort to try to prove this postulate from the other ones. And the project was shown ultimately. I couldn't give you a date or the very first person to do it, but it was in the 1800s or 1900s, early 1900s, maybe late 1800s, uh, when people constructed geometries in which that was false. And it turns out that there are geometries where it's false. You can
Really?
have, yeah, they're called non-Euclidean geometries. Um, so, one example is uh, one example of non-Euclidean geometry would be projective geometry, which is the math of perspective. In the math of perspective, in fact, parallel lines do meet. They meet at a point at
Right.
infinity.
The
They meet
vanishing
at a
point.
point at infinity. The vanishing point, exactly. And
Yeah.
when this math was discovered, that was also, during the Renaissance. And then they got really good at art. They suddenly figured out perspective. Like if you, it's, I found it very interesting when I was in Paris. I went through the Louvre, and they had pre-Renaissance art and Renaissance art, and you can see literally the years when they discovered perspective
Interesting.
because the drawings were flat, and then they figured out the vanishing point, and suddenly they had hyper realistic looking drawings of paintings. So that's one example.
I have a quick question on that though.
Yeah.
The parallel you said two parallel lines never meet, but with
Yeah.
perspective they appear to. They don't actually intersect.
No,
They
they
just
literally do.
Can you help me understand that?
Yeah, they meet at a point they meet at a point
But from that
infinity.
perspective, they're not actually parallel lines. From that perspective.
Within the mathematical structure, there is a point at which they meet. And this is a totally valid mathematical structure, and it
Hmm.
well describes many phenomena.
Hmm. Okay, I'm having a
Um,
tough time with that one because I.
so if you're trying to say that you take two in literal space, are they going to meet? No. If you keep going there, yes. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. But that's because we live in a actually we don't live in Euclidean space. We live on a manifold, which means we live in a locally Euclidean space. What that is, for example, the surface of a sphere is not Euclidean.
Okay.
Um, so um, um, two hold on. And there's other examples of geometries in which parallel lines actually can meet. There's ones where they can meet multiple times. I'm trying to think spherical geometry violates the parallel postulate. And I'm trying to think about yes, because great circles um um meet. Their parallel lines meet on a sphere.
But those aren't lines.
Well, what line means is different if your
Right.
space is curved. If your space is
Okay.
curved, what line means is different. So, for example, if you form a triangle
Mm-hmm.
on a sphere,
Mm-hmm.
the angles of that triangle don't add up to 180 degrees. They don't satisfy the Pythagorean theorem. The meaning of a line is different
Oh my gosh.
on on a sphere.
I need to listen to you
Um,
just give a math lecture sometime if I want my mind
Yeah,
blown.
I will absolutely give you a math lecture. I'm constantly trying to show 9-year-olds about how some infinities are larger than others and group theory and all sorts of stuff.
Hmm.
I think in some ways a lot of the some of the arguments around God come down to a general like not being super comfortable with the concept of infinity
Okay. I can
um,
see that.
in a way that when you work mathematics, it's just not such a mysterious concept. Like I feel like when infinity is super mysterious to you, you kind of jam a lot of stuff into it. In fact, I had a talk recently about AI safety. I think this is an element with that, where if people, I think there is some reason to think that AI might kill us all, but but we don't really know. And some of the people who are super terrified, it's like, well, what would you do like if the AI acquires super intelligence and they're like a god test? It's like, I mean, maybe that could happen, but you don't know. Like you can jam a lot of stuff into the idea that this superhuman AI is going to be infinitely intelligent or whatever, and it's going to destroy us. Um, yeah, I think infinities mess with people's minds, especially like in moral cases too. Um, yeah, infinity kind of messes with people a lot.
I can see
Um,
that.
so I think, for example, the cosmological argument has
Hmm.
kind of a like I'm not sure a misunderstanding of infinity, but it says there had to have been a first cause
Yeah.
because
Here's
there's a
the
prior
illustration.
cause. Yeah, and because it's saying like, well, it couldn't just be a chain that goes off to infinity, and it's like, why not? Why couldn't it be a chain that goes off to infinity? It's upsetting to think about, maybe, but
Man, I actually did have an answer for this, and I because the existence of actual infinites doesn't actually exist
how do you
in
know?
because man, I am so rusty. I wish I had reviewed this before we chatted. Um,
We don't have examples of real infinities.
um
I mean, in our what we don't know, we wouldn't be able to know what's beyond the universe. So our within constants go for on forever. I'm not sure what you mean by constants, but uh, so if we take our universe for example, there seems to be a finite amount of mass inside of our universe. Um, but that mass came from some singularity, and we don't know what was before that singularity. We don't know what happens beyond the singularity. Oh, you say no actual infinities. Black holes are possibly infinities. They're singularities in which density approaches infinity, and all sorts of really wacky things happen. Well, yeah, possibly, because we don't know anything. So my perspective is I'm like an absurdist. I think a lot of these arguments come from like thinking that we know more than we do, and I think like
Yeah.
we just don't know. Like we don't know anything. I don't think we know any. I think we know almost nothing
Sure.
about
You
the
know what? Let's
universe.
let's take that angle. Let's take that angle. We know almost nothing about the universe. So we have a few options. We can either try to figure out how the universe started, or we can just kind of say, it's impossible. Or we can try to come up with a few ideas, and then I guess I'm in the camp where I like to try to figure that out, and I'm going to pick the most plausible option and go along with that because it's the best of what we have.
Mhm.
We by definition we have finite minds and we can't know everything.
I
So
don't know that it's easy to uh there's an infinity of possible choices to make, and there's not a clear way to frame one as better than another when
there's
it comes
two.
to
There's two in my view. There was an
Mhm.
uncaused cause or unmoved mover, or it
Oh, with
always
respect to the cosmological argument.
yeah, or it just always like you're saying maybe there was no start and things have always existed always. Um,
Okay, so all of the stuff that we see in the sky seems to be coming from some singularity at the start, and we call that one the Big Bang. Um, what happened beyond that is a total black box. Um, it could be, it could have just happened and was an uncaused cause. Um, it could be uh, something that happens a lot. It could be something that's never happened before. Because before it gets a bit finicky, um, because our notion of time is breaks down around the Big Bang. Um, um, uh, so it could be that um, some have suggested that a Big Bang is what it looks like on the inside of a black hole, for example. There's just so many possible hypotheses
I think though
for
between
it.
that scenario, either one of those things are true. One of them is true,
Th-
or one of them is not true. In that case,
That it was eternal or there was an uncaused
either
cause.
there was like an actual
Um,
infinite, or there was an uncaused cause. I don't see any
well,
other.
one thing that's confusing is that uh the topology of um remember I mentioned before about open sets,
Mm,
how you can have an earliest point but not a first point. Um
mm.
and so I don't know. I just don't know that that's true. I don't know that that's necessarily true. That there's definitely um okay, you're saying there's either an uncaused cause
Yeah, or there
or
just
what?
was always infinite. Like we'll say that there's actual infinites as in this
Okay, I feel
reality.
like with topology it could be both.
How's that?
Um, so suppose that that cause is the point zero that we
Okay,
can't ever reach,
okay,
and I can infinitely get closer to that point.
okay.
That would like from a certain topological standpoint, there's an eternity as we go closer and closer to that
Yeah,
point.
you mentioned between there's an infinite
Um,
number of points between
yeah,
every point, right?
yeah. So it could be internal from a certain topological standpoint, and then it also could have a starting point.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but
Was there like it's not even clear to me, was there a first moment, or if there's not a very first moment, and the idea of a first moment gets very confusing. If there uh wasn't a first moment, then that is in some sense eternal. Even if it's 14 billion years ago, there's like a sense in which that's eternal still.
hmm, I don't know that I follow 100%. To me, that's just
Um,
either there's a starting point or there's not. I know what you're saying, where it's like, well, maybe there was a starting point, but it will take an infinite amount of time to get to that first starting point. That's
yeah.
effectively just it's infinite. Then it's not a starting point at all.
Yeah, okay, like say with a black hole, you can't ever get into a black hole.
Okay.
You can't ever get in. Because of the time dilation, you become so extreme
Right.
that the entire universe ends behind you before you get there.
Makes sense.
Um, 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 but from your perspective, you're going to see yourself just go in
Okay.
because the time dilation is different from a different perspective. So from outside perspective, you're never going to seem like you get closer to it. But from the perspective of the person there, they just go straight in. Um, I don't know. Time is really confusing. A lot of the stuff around the start of time is physics doesn't have a clearer answer. It just seems like a black box. It just seems completely unclear. Um, yeah, and I don't know why there couldn't just be an infinite chain of causes. One cause another, cause another, cause another. Because from my perspective, I don't know what caused the Big Bang. And also it seems like that's a black box and that we won't ever have a way to touch outside of it. That's the end of probably the laws of physics, that as we're able to study them, we would need some crazy new phenomena to try to observe what goes on before that, if we can make sense of before that.
Mm-hmm.
um and so the what happened before that, or what is outside of the Big Bang, if such a thing is just completely mysterious.
Right.
And I think this my solution to that is that I think we just have to cope with the fact that it's just completely opaque to us.
All right. Can I give like a
Um,
really basic response to what you've been saying
yeah,
so far? So I
yeah.
would say I liked the terminology you used. Was chess invented or was chess discovered?
Yeah.
I like that. I very much think it's invented, but I like that the way that you think of things. It's almost like you're discovering something that's already there. But to me,
That's Plato.
yeah, like logic like that, or if you like chip away at something and you discover logic or you discover math or you discover these rules, a lot of that to me is sort of like a teleological point where it's
Mhm.
it's designed a certain way, and the fact that we can recognize that as a type of design and we see how that works
But
almost.
that design may in fact be a reflection of the designs hidden within our conceptual framework.
That's possible. That's possible. But because information is just, or no, sorry, communication is
Mhm.
just exchanging information between minds.
Mhm.
So to me, if we're getting information, so would you say that we're getting information from ourselves because we're perceiving it a certain way?
Um,
Because I
Getting
would say it's
information.
external. I would say it's
When you say we're getting information, do you mean like we're using our sense data?
yes. We're discovering a lot,
Yeah,
something we're discovering
yeah.
math.
Though I'm somewhat skeptical of sense data. I do think there's some real problems with sense data. But it seems to be the best that we've got. Yeah.
So so it's sort of us telling ourselves. Because one thing when I talk to agnostics or if I talk to atheists is a lot of the time, in my opinion, I think the moral argument is the strongest in terms of what I think the atheists' points are the weakest, if that makes sense. Like I think overall, I
What about
think
the moral argument?
yeah, I think the moral argument is something I appreciate because I've never talked to an atheist who's convinced me a sound argument for here is the atheistic moral argument. To me,
Uh-huh.
it's always like, oh, cool. So you guys like opinions, and you place a lot of emphasis
Yeah.
on opinions. Um,
I think um okay. I'm gonna say that of course the atheist has trouble forming a morality. I think it's a huge challenge. I think that we have this giant philosophical field called ethics, and then also a giant field called meta ethics about like, do these questions even make sense?
yeah.
And there's no consensus on these. It's not easy to come to any solutions on any of them. Um, that said, I don't think that I don't think that theism saves you really from it.
Okay.
I wrote down the moral argument as listed in the video.
Yeah.
Morality is only real. One, I give it as a two premises and a conclusion. Morality is only real if God is real. Um, Something like this. This is my version of it.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then the video. Good and bad are only real if God is real. Good and bad, objective morality is real, and therefore God is real.
Yeah.
And as an argument, this is a valid argument. In philosophy, validity means if the premises are true, the conclusion follows. Um, and so I tackle it by saying it's not sound, that those premises are not necessarily true. So, is morality only real if God is real? I'm not sure that God being real actually gives you morality. This is an ancient problem called the Euthyphro dilemma. Is it good because it's loved by God, or is it loved by God because it's good?
Why
Um,
can't they be the same
and
thing? Goodness
Um,
is of God, so they're one and the same.
uh, I don't know. I feel like this.
When you say something is good, you're saying that thing is godlike in some way.
Well, I think that's one of the big problems. I'm not sure that good has meaning. So,
Okay.
so I come from like I'm like an existentialist.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so existentialism is like saying like, oh crap, nihilism.
Right.
What do I do about my life given nihilism?
Right.
Um, and so I don't know. I don't think that words like good have like a clearly defined non-arbitrary meaning.
Okay.
Um, so I think yeah, we're gonna run into problems there. Um, I don't think that the creator of the universe because I don't think that the creator of the universe fixes that. I don't think the creator of the universe suddenly is able to declare things good or tell us what is good or answer that question. I think that goodness is like not clearly defined and hard to understand and opaque either way.
Okay. I think it's true that it might be possible to not know if something is moral or not due to our limited knowledge. But I think if we already used the language of good back, you just said you don't know if you can
What if
define good. So do we just abandon moral
it can't be
language?
known? What if it can't be known? Worse than
It's
you not
possible.
knowing
It's
if it
possible.
can't be
It's
known.
possible. Yeah. But it might still. But it has to still exist, or else we wouldn't have
Mm,
a word for it.
If we can't know whether it is or not, that does not mean it has to exist.
But because we have a way to describe it, I think it does
We
have
can
to
describe
exist.
things that can't be known and we don't know whether they exist or not.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, in math.
Okay.
um, so the 1900s were full of these interesting places where our view on math and science was shifted away from full certainty to uh, real uncertainty in a lot of areas. So in physics, we got in the same 20 years, we got relativity, which was really crazy in terms of the paradoxical way it affects what time and space mean.
And that's a theory,
And then
right? The theory of relativity.
yes, but scientific theory is really strong. The word
Right.
theory in science is very strong. So yes,
Right.
it's special relativity. So special relativity follows from certain observations that we've
Well,
had,
it's as strong as
namely that
science is, and science has its own limitations.
yes. So what special relativity is founded on is the observation that light moves the same speed in all reference frames.
Okay.
And based on that observational paradox, what follows naturally is that when you move fast, time slows down and you squish. And then further, that heavy things curve space-time towards them and make time slow down for the things near them. All this stuff follows from the empirical observation that light uh, moves the same in all reference frames. Meaning, what it means for light to move the same in all reference frames is imagine you are imagine you're on the side of the road and I'm on the back of a pickup truck and I drive by and the pickup truck is going 40 miles per hour. Me on the pickup truck, it doesn't feel like the pickup truck is moving at all. It feels like the
Right.
world's coming at me at 40 miles per hour. Okay. And then I take a football and I can throw the football at 30 miles per hour. So
That's a
I'm
pretty
on
good
that.
throw, man. You should
Yeah,
you should go to state, man.
maybe
Jeez.
baseball. Maybe baseball.
That's pretty good.
So I throw a baseball 30 miles per hour. Not that great of a baseball throw. And okay, and so to me, the baseball looks like it's going 30 miles per hour, but I'm getting some momentum from your perspective from the pickup truck, and you observe it as going 70 miles per hour, the baseball, because it's the speed of the truck plus the ball, right?
Right.
It's kind of like when you're driving on the freeway and you see someone going the other way, it looks like they're going really fast because they're
Right.
going against your speed.
Right.
Um, but light works different. So when if you were on the side of the road and I'm in the pickup truck, and I shine my headlights, I see my light go away at light speed. And let's say my car is going half the speed of light. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, so very fast car. I shine my lights forward and uh and I see when I shoot my lights forward, light goes out at light speed.
Right.
You on the side of the road, you see my car going half the speed of light,
Hmm.
and then you see the light going not 1.5 times the speed of light, not the speed of the truck plus light. You see it also going light speed.
Interesting.
And this was highly paradoxical. And basically, Einstein put the puzzles together in something called special relativity, which basically implies that the only way the universe makes sense of this is for time to slow down for different observers, for time to function differently for the observer going at half the speed of light versus the other person, and then also for lengths to contract. So you would observe my truck as being like all squished in the direction of motion. And then basically that observation, it took him 10 years, that observation leads to general relativity, which says that due to gravity, basically space gets squished. So like we don't actually live in Euclidean space. We live in locally Euclidean space, but actually our space gets curved due to gravity.
Okay.
Um, and it all comes from this observation around light. There's all
Hmm.
these crazy things that follow as a consequence from just this observation. So anyways, you mentioned it's a theory, but it's a powerful theory that comes from a pretty simple observation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so you can doubt the theory insofar as you can doubt our capacity to form observations about the world
Yeah.
or about the world acting consistently over time,
Yeah.
potentially.
Hmm.
But within those bounds, it's a really powerful theory. But it has some issues, and we hope someday to have a better
Right.
theory that explains what happens when things are really small and go
Hmm.
really fast. Because basically, we have these two different theories.
So thank you so much for laying that out. I didn't know about that. But see, like, here's another example. I want to go back to the transcendental argument now. So the fact that we can even use science as a tool to come up with these theories
Yeah.
kind of presupposes that logic works, there's consistency,
Yep.
that truth exists.
Yep.
And to
We're all
me,
taking something on faith, and I'm gonna
yeah,
I'm gonna be there with you. So
yeah,
I'm taking the axioms of mathematics that they apply to the real world. I'm taking the axiom that our sense data brings us some information about the world. I'm gonna take that on faith as well.
yeah. And to me, the fact that there are these structures at all, I guess there's two options again. If we maybe that's being too simplistic, but maybe we've completely these are all our own constructs, all these logic working, or someone designed it and someone put it into motion to be discovered.
Someone,
Yeah.
yeah,
It requires a mind if we can pick up on
I
these
do.
structures.
Um, the structures
Yeah.
and laying them out may require a mind to observe them. Like even observing of it, even observing of the structures maybe is kind of like a mind's activity, like to observe general relativity at all.
Okay.
And you could argue that's a kind of creation, but
Hmm.
I don't think that no, I don't think that like I don't think that it would be hard for me to believe that there's a being out there that's deciding what mathematically works and what doesn't.
What do you mean by that?
I don't think that it works or doesn't work on the basis of something underneath. I hope it works. It seems like it does. But and yeah, so on your thing, it's like, oh, there's these things that can't be proven scientifically, so we have this grounding belief that maybe helps us explain all of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's kind of a cope. I think we just can't explain it. Like I think we just like have to accept the absurdity that we're living in a world where certain things seem to be true to us, but
Mm-hmm.
we could be mistaken.
Right. We could be.
And it could be, and I think certain big elements definitely are,
Mm-hmm.
because like there's huge things that we really still don't know about the universe. Uh, it's like 70% of mass in the universe is like dark matter that doesn't interact with light, and that's how we learn about things is by interacting
Mm-hmm.
electromagnetically with it.
Huh.
And so like we don't even know what other substrates of existence there could be hiding
Right.
inside that dark matter. We never will really be able to know unless we become some mega singularity like computer existence living on a cosmological scale of planet-sized things that can actually observe things gravitationally
Yeah.
at a massive scale. Yeah, so for all we know that there's other people inside there
Mm-hmm.
living and having consciousness and stuff. Um, yeah, you mentioned dark matter is a hint that our understanding of physics is fundamentally flawed. Yeah, yeah, we don't know. It's completely confusing. So there's parts we can't explain, and it might just end up being impossible for us to ever really have a meaningful explanation for it.
I want to go back to what you said. Your critique of the moral argument was good and bad just might not exist. And I said, well, what do you
Yeah,
mean?
we
We
don't
we have
know.
we have concepts to talk about them. So what do you mean they couldn't exist? And you said, well,
Oh, yes, I got stuck on a
yeah,
tangent. Oh my God, I got stuck on a scientific tangent.
yeah,
You're right. Yes. Okay, I did have a point about that. There are things. Okay, and so yes, because I mentioned special relativity was
yes,
confusing at the time. It changed our understanding. Quantum mechanics added a lot of uncertainty into inherent uncertainty into observing things in the world. And then in mathematics, we discovered that there are bounds to rationality itself. So have you heard of Gödel?
I
Uh,
have not.
Girdle, Godel, but the O has like a double dot,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's pronounced Girdle. And he was a logician from about the same period, so 1920s to 1950s or so, and he proved famously he proved they're called the incompleteness theorems. So what the incompleteness theorems show is that if you have a mathematical structure strong enough to perform arithmetic, then there are true facts within that structure, things that are true, that are unprovable.
Hmm.
And he
Okay.
does so by constructing an argument of the form, this theorem cannot be proven. So it's self-referential. And he manages to construct such an argument within the structure of number theory. He manages to make a theorem within number theory that references itself, called the Gödel sentence. And so the Gödel sentence is structurally, it's this theorem cannot be proven. So think about that for a second.
Okay.
Suppose it were false. Suppose that sentence were false. Then it's false that it can't be proven. It's therefore provable.
Right.
And if it is provable, it is therefore true.
Right.
So it would be false and true, which would be a contradiction. So, therefore, it must be true. It must be true that it cannot be proven,
Right.
and is hence an unprovable truth within that system. Now that's assuming that there aren't contradictions, and so that's why you're basically, and it's disturbing that it's all it takes is arithmetic to do it, because the thought is like, oh well, maybe we just throw in some extra axioms and we just have like a more basic theory that doesn't. It's like the most basic things that we want to be able to talk about, the whole numbers. If you have these, then you have these statements about them that Either the entire, you basically completeness and consistency are at odds with each other. If your system is consistent and has no contradictions and no flaws, then it is on some level like opaque. You can't actually know everything about it. You can't prove things that are true. And then there have been some non-trivial things that have been proven to be um, true. So there are these different sizes of infinity, and maybe I'll at some point I'll give you a nice little lecture to explain it. It's all very nice, but what I'll say, I'll just give you the quick rundown. Basically, the smallest size of infinity is the set of the natural numbers. That's the smallest infinity. It's called countable, and infinity can be a bit funny to think about. The even numbers are the same size as the natural numbers. Even though the natural numbers contain the even numbers, they're the same size. This is a little disturbing at first. The fractions, the set of fractions, even though between any two whole numbers is an infinity of fractions, it turns out there are just as many fractions as there are natural numbers. You can count the fractions. You can order it so that there is a first fraction, a second fraction, a third fraction, and so on. However, the real numbers, the real number line, including irrational numbers like pi or e or square root of 2, this is an uncountable infinity. It is vastly larger than the set of natural numbers. There is no way to count it. There's no way to define meaningfully a first real number, a second real number, a third real number in a way in which you end up getting all the real numbers. There's no way to do this. There are so many more real numbers that if you take the number line from 0 to 1 and you were to throw a dart at the number line, your probability of hitting a fraction, of which between that 0 and 1, there's infinity fractions, your probability of hitting a fraction is 0%, because there are so many more real numbers than there are fractions in between each one. Your chance of hitting one of those strange transcendental real numbers is 100%. So that size of infinity is called Aleph 1. Aleph null is the symbol. It's a Hebrew letter, is used to describe the smallest size of infinity. There's a second size of infinity. It turns out that there's basically a procedure by which you can create bigger sets of infinity. So there's a set of infinities bigger than the real numbers. If you know what a function is, the set of functions from real numbers to real numbers is much more numerous. You can think of them as curves. The amount of curves, possible curves in space, are vastly more numerous than the real numbers. And then basically there's an infinite chain of sizes of infinities, all infinitely larger than the last. And the question, a natural question is, are there any infinities in between the natural numbers and the real numbers? So if we call that one Aleph 0 and we call the other one Aleph 1, is there an Aleph 1/2 or an Aleph 3/4? Is there a continuum of infinities? And it was proven in the 50s. We don't know. We can't know. It cannot be proven either way. The entire edifice of math is totally consistent with one or the other. It's called the continuum hypothesis. And so the continuum hypothesis was solved by being proven to be unsolvable. It is not resolvable in a meaningful way. So lots of people kind of have feelings about the continuum hypothesis.
Yeah.
I feel like the continuum hypothesis is true because there don't seem to be infinities between the two, but there are mathematicians who make kind of interesting sounding arguments, and maybe it is, but it all gets very philosophical. And yeah, so there are unknowable, non-trivial, unknowable, unprovable things just within the realm of mathematics, let alone when you get into the problems of empiricism, of testing something scientifically and trusting your eyes that looked at the test and your brain that reasoned about the test, and all these things that make science much less knowable. And so that's why I kind of think, like, I don't really think we know anything. I think we almost kind of know math, and we know a lot of math, and by extension, we know a lot of physics. I think it's very easy for us to feel like we know a lot because we're surrounded by all this technology. And
Right.
so we think science brings us all these amazing answers. But really, it just brings us technology.
Yeah.
And a lot of stuff we basically still just don't know. We don't know anything about psychology. We don't know anything about someone says we don't know math and physics. Well, we know something about them because we've built all this crazy technology. That's my perspective, is that clearly we know something about math and physics, but that confidence that we get from all this technology that we've built is not applied to all of the like when we try to study psychology or biology or nutrition. It seems like we just don't know anything about any other field. We try to use um scientific method on these, but it gets very difficult. Yeah.
I want to segue into the ontological argument because
I'll have to actually leave at 2.
Okay.
So we got 3 minutes.
Great.
Yeah.
To me, this dovetails into it. So you just demonstrated that there's examples in math where there are things that we know that we cannot know them. But that doesn't mean that we limited minds can't know them. It doesn't mean that there isn't a correct answer. We can't arrive at what it is.
Well, God couldn't prove it.
Well, maybe within the constraints of how we could understand it here on Earth, maybe not.
Not within the constraints of piano arithmetic.
That's possible, but my main point is because there's limited power, because there's limited knowledge, because there's limited goodness, that by definition means there has to exist maximum power, maximum goodness, or the opposite, absolute no goodness, absolutely no power, absolute. There has to be extremes for us to even observe a degree. Like if we can see something can be more of something, someone can have more knowledge, someone can have less. So there has to be an extreme point of that, and I think that's
Maybe
another
knowledge. I might agree. Goodness, no. I don't think goodness is well defined. That's where I'm going to disagree. I don't think goodness is actually a well defined concept.
That's fine.
Knowledge, I think you could make an argument about that, and I do in some sense believe in some kind of godlike like function that has all the information inside of it of everything. But I think some of the ontological stuff, the ontological argument hinges on this. There must be a maximally good thing, and then he must exist because to exist is better than to not exist. And I just don't think that follows at all.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. Well, I know you have to go.
Anyways, I do have to go.
Thanks for spending some time with me and talking about this. It was really a great time.
I'm sure we'll talk again.
I hope so.
In the future.
Yeah.
But yes, I do really have to leave now.
All right.
Okay. All right. Take
care.
See you,
Drew.
Talk.
Yeah.
All right. Bye.
Take it easy. All right. That was Unable Table. I'm going to close out of Discord here. Thanks again to Drew for that discussion. Okay. So definitely into the math stuff. Definitely going to places where I'm definitely less knowledgeable. So I was really happy to learn from him. And for anyone that tuned in, thank you so much. And is it Leaks TVs? Am I saying your name right? Thank you so much for the follow. I also want to thank a few of the other folks. Goodle Shoes, thank you for the follow. Mr. Mystic Shorts and Astro Cloud. And also to Sub Goes as well. I appreciate the follows. Yeah. Okay, so it's Leaks TV. Great. For that video, for those curious, I will link to the video. It's just a little overview of the different kinds of arguments. It doesn't go deep. It's not like a deep dive into any of them, but it's a nice starting point for a discussion. So I'll link to it in the chat, and also put it in the VOD description as well if you want to check that out. That is by Redeemed Zoomer. It's called All Arguments for God Explained in 10 Minutes. It's a good starting point to have some good discussions, and we surprisingly did pretty much touch on every topic, although we did not talk about America First very much. So we did touch on it a little bit, but I'm sort of interested to go a bit more into that because I'm learning more about that as well, trying to understand a bit more about their movement and what they believe. So, all right. Thank you guys so much. Again, I know that we discussed topics that can make some people uncomfortable. I appreciate you guys hanging out and just chatting with us. And for those of you who are lurking, thanks for lurking. I just one of the big goals for this kind of thing is to demonstrate and kind of show you that yes, you can have conversations about these things. You can engage in respectful, productive ways, and it's not all doom and gloom. It's not so tribalistic that anyone that disagrees with you must be the enemy. You can talk about really anything. So, all right, yeah, Grant, and thank you so much for chiming in on areas where I definitely didn't know as much. I appreciate that. So with that being said, I think what we're going to do is we're going to raid my friend AJ, although he's already been streaming for 6.5 hours. Good grief. We'll see if we can catch him. So, as a Christian, you should always try to encourage the argument. I could not agree more. All right, we'll talk a lot more about that in the future. I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.